Y2K, a postmodern RPG, or simply YIIK. Does it need any introduction?
The needle of the record player has struck. It's everywhere.
What the hell was that? Tell me what the hell is going on? What is all this about? What just happened? This is insane. What is a soul survivor? Did you guys see that? What the hell are the Frankton Popo doing here?
That phone call was surely one of the strangest I've ever received. And no, I couldn't hear the music.
Yeah, probably. It's a 2019 RPG, possibly postmodern, inspired by Earthbound, Final Fantasy, Paper Mario, and surrealist Japanese literature. It has abnormal characters, strange enemies, minigame-based battles, Elisa Lamb's death, reality-bending puzzles, and irreverent humor. To those who are unfamiliar, that contrast of inspirations may sound appealing or appalling. Well, for me, Y2K was one of the most unique, interesting, and thoroughly unenjoyable experiences I've had with a game and a novel. To those who've watched clips, know the egregiously annoying bits, and have maybe seen a critique or two, it may seem like an easy game to tear a new one. Well, yes and no. It's so consistently poor in so many ways that I could probably just write an unstructured laundry list of grievances, and I doubt many would fault me if that's all this video was. But I've had to restart this script a lot. Putting YIIK into words has been tricky, and not just because of how many words it's given me. Like many of my other videos, it will be on the longer end, so timestamps and such are in the description if you don't want to watch all of this in one go. It will be here when you got time, and I think too much YIIK at once can be unhealthy. My experience with Y2K didn't start when I opened the game, and they didn't end when I closed it. The confused mess of a reception it got was fascinating. It rapidly grew in jokes around it. Tidbits of dialogue so awkward that they could be quoted endlessly. Entire mishandled scenes to be shocked by. The title itself became YIIK, which drove home just how bungled it all was. It's rare for me to watch a lot of reviews and read articles on one title, both amateur and mainstream. But I was enthralled by how it seemed everyone who played YIIK was walking away with at least one new grievance. Anyone could look at YIIK, agree with others over its many issues, but still have something unique which annoyed them. The most critical were the people who thought they had YIIK pegged. Meanwhile, the more positive takes were giving it the benefit of the doubt or trying to place it in some larger context. But few could bring themselves to say they liked it. When I played YIIK for myself, it wasn't alone. Me and Noonem played through the entire thing together. Our time was spent mostly annoyed at the game, and steadily more at each other's throats as we tried to claw something out of it.
So this is like a metaphorical fight, isn't it?
It speeds up around there, it gets dodgy. I don't know, man. I don't know. Our feelings quickly split. He saw it as a game meant to disorient and mean nothing by design, drawing the player into questioning meaningless minutiae before throwing it away or contradicting established ideas in an attempt to deliberately irritate. I argued it was a bad game acting in earnest and had to mean something, however ill-explained. Over the course of our time playing, I got worn down while Noonem got more assured. I was trying to keep the story in mind so that I could prove it was trying, even consulting a screenshot LP between play sessions. Thanks Tim Rod for your incredible patience in transcribing YIIK. Playing YIIK felt like YIIK was playing me right back. Trying to understand what YIIK wants to say was like bashing my head against a brick wall. I'm glad I had someone else there to argue with rather than just the game alone. As credits rolled, I was thoroughly sick of YIIK. I didn't beat it. It beat me. This video isn't even here to pull back the win. It's just explaining how a time wizard magicked tens of hours away and continues to do so. Since I have thought about YIIK a lot since finishing it, I wondered how I'd eventually approach it, and when I opened the footage to start note-taking months after finishing it, and well, months before this video is finished, I thought I had cooled off. But within minutes of reading dialogue, that frustration resurfaced like it had never left. That fire was still burning in me. Between that and the developers promising since January to release a combat patch that overhauls the battle system, which I figured I'd wait on in the sake of fairness, this video has taken a long, long time. And simply put, I have no idea if we will ever see that combat overhaul, and I'm not waiting on it any longer. On September 9th, I finish my narration, I cut the flubs I find, I tidy it up a little, and I head to bed planning to start editing YIIK the next day. I wake up, and it's not just a combat update anymore. We'll see. We'll see, YIIK. You got to exist like this for nearly 2 years. I'm talking about the game I played. I'm talking about what I played. Not the future. My feelings on Y2K are a lot like Y2K. They're overlong, frustratingly complicated, and at times contradictory. I have 2 reads of what YIIK means. Both readings are backed up by events and themes in the story, but they are sort of exclusive because one denies meaning while the other infers it. I agree that the game is bad. It's a story so poorly told that bothering to claw meaning out of it is just not worthwhile. But I see a lot of people bring up things that I see as misinterpretations to berate the game unfairly. Considering how much rope it already gives people, that's really something.
I sighed as the elevator began to shake, vibrating with motion.
Vibrating with motion.
Despite all of that, this video is not a defense. It's more that I've turned up with a different stick to beat a dead horse. This also isn't me claiming to be some genius who solved YIIK. This isn't me being the final word on the game. If this video somehow makes you want to play YIIK for yourself, you can spend your time arguing with me as well as the game, as I had with Noonem, and that might make it a more interesting experience. And lastly, most tragically, I can't judge YIIK for being self-indulgent because, well, that's exactly what my videos are. But seeing as that's the case, I'm gonna judge it anyway. So you might think I've said enough and we're good to go, but slow down there, cowboy. This is the 90s. Sort of. The pacing's on dial-up. First off, Marlene explains the title. The developers are in on Y2K looking like YIIK, and I suppose if people like this game then calling it that would have been endearing. Didn't quite work out that way, but I get it. YIIK is memorable and easy to spread. With Y2K, you're sending your game to the arse end of Google. Not to mention, we're going to learn this game has actually little to do with the Y2K bug or surrounding hysteria. It is about an apocalypse at the turn of the millennium, sure, but it's a hollow reference. So for the younger people watching, the good news is you're not going to learn anything. We then have to enter a few names and pick a gender. This stuff won't come up until late game, and I doubt we'll appreciate it when it does. This part is an odd tone setter. You may look at it and think, oh, so it's letting us know it's like Earthbound. It really isn't. This Questionaire's vibe is distinct from the rest of the game, which I find to be a small blessing since it isn't charming to begin with. If it is establishing anything, it's that if YIIK can say something in one text box, it'll do it in 5 and fill them to bursting. While most of the jokes aren't original or clever, this is what kills the comedy dead. With purely textual comedy, you really have to weigh your words. One too many can turn a joke from comical to clumsy, and YIIK is never off by just one word. Each gag winds up stumbling over its own self-assured hilarity on the way to a plot line. Yeah, I can't call these punchlines. There is no punch when you're this loquacious. I mean, a dull thud at best, and you come off like a tryhard who uses words like loquacious. There's really no mix like desperation and unwarranted confidence to get people laughing with you. By the time it asks about the final friend, the description is so wordy and overly specific, it's as if it's been intentionally building to this bit all along, but the rest of the game is even more long-winded. Most titles ratchet up the difficulty as they go along, but YIIK ups the wordiness. Is this a joke, or is this slowly turning up the heat? Purposeful or not, when even the title is weirdly bloated, maybe it's meant as a warning. Anyhow, when all is said and done, this was about as fun as a tax return and half as well written, but, well, YIIK now knows our names. Gladly. Let's go. The game opens on April 4th, 1999. We're Alex Eggleston, a liberal arts major who just graduated college after a semester too many, returning home to a town that really likes the last game Act made.
I had no idea what adult life held for me, but I was optimistic.
I sort of doubt this is our home because as we'll learn, no one would be happy to have Alex back. But we can indeed enter and inhabit the joint. This git has also decided to sit on our lawn and make a game-spanning joke about zines. Our mother can't be here to greet us, but she did leave a grocery list.
Not even home 5 minutes and she's already barking orders at me.
She erected a bloody sign for you, Alex. Well, I'll get around to that. For now, I want to know about his home life. And while we do get the idea that Alex's family is fractured, we don't get much that we couldn't see with our eyes. No, Alex, we were just told what to do. I don't feel much thought was put into these little dialogues. They often come across contradictory to the story itself, and the fact it's happening this early on just makes it look like nobody's paying attention. I get that this fridge dialogue is meant to push further that Alex is a shiftless ingrate, but to put it in this way is just strange. It's like these two bits of dialogue don't fit together. About the only detail I like is tied to Alex's record player. He notes that it's from his dad. It doesn't say it outright, but the fact his dad is referenced in a detached way and never seen gives this dialogue a bittersweet tinge that you get to unpack for yourself, while also giving Alex's appreciation of vinyl some context. Or maybe he hates his dad and his damn records, I don't know. The rest of the house is pretty useless, and that won't change. We look at our mum's underwear, nick $20 to give to Zine Guy, and outside things aren't much better. The issue with a lot of dialogues is that they don't really change over the course of the game to reflect changes in the story or the world. They often seem written to not relate to anything, but still wind up jarring. At a certain point in the story, Alex's mother loses her job, but this woman never moves or says anything different. Why yes, I just got home from college and have been gone for years, but I'll put in a word with the sister I never see. This guy gets a whole year off work. I'd be less grumpy. Besides that, it's some scattershot, extremely weak gags. Since the NPC dialogue is static, it's surprising how it still manages to tread on the toes of the story. I also think YIIK would have specifically benefited from the chatter progressing and changing over the course of the narrative. The fact that it doesn't feels like a missed opportunity and winds up hurting things. We head off in search of those groceries, and things get worse. Alex runs into this cat and starts banging on about it in great detail, which turns into imagining his life with the bloody thing. The cat sees what it assumes is his script and nabs it. Alex gives chase, and winds up in a strange, otherworldly factory hotel filled with monsters, weird landscapes, and puzzles, along with a talking panda that can help solve them.
It's me, Panda!
It's here he runs into Semi-Pack, and some awkward dialogue happens.
Great, another person.
I'll leave if you want. I don't want to talk to you.
Hey, I can leave if you like.
Fuck! It turns out the cat belongs to her. Sammy says this is her home and she doesn't know what elevators are, before getting in an elevator with us to leave. Which she does. Alex is left befuddled, but still erect. There's a lot to unpack here. This first dungeon is a gauntlet. Alex narrates everything. You could take all the ventilation in the world, jam it together, and it still wouldn't be half as long-winded as this cunt. He adds so much fluff to every scene, often just repeating what we can see. He's meant to be an unreliable narrator, and the script wants to sneak false details and Alex's shitty speculation past the listener, and it does so through sheer volume. Now, this has an obvious side effect. It gets tiring not even just sorting what's fictional fiction from fictional fact, but even just passively listening to the dialogue begins to wear me down. Now, a mystery will have misdirection. That's fine. I get that Alex is a moronic blowhard and I should take everything he says with a grain of salt, but man, that's enough sodium for a fucking heart attack. The parts with the panda and Sammy add another layer. It's not just when he's alone. Very long dialogues will play out before Alex's narration kicks in, which rarely does more than just repeat what was said from Alex's perspective.
Elevator? I don't know what that is.
Who doesn't know what an elevator is?
I've been looking for my cat, Dolly. Have you seen her?
So the stupid thing was a girl?
I don't know who that is. My cat just looks like Dolly herself.
I doubted she'd know her 20th century Spanish Catalan surrealist painters all that well either.
I love the moment we get Panda. The game treats it like our first tool, but we've already met Alex. Panda gives us a tutorial on how he's used.
You can press circle to summon me.
Alex repeats it. Then the game asks if I'd like the tutorial repeated. Aren't you calling yourself a postmodern RPG? I mean, your audience is presumably RPG fans, hopefully not first-timers. Why am I getting such a hand-holdy tutorial and zero trust when it comes to one of the most stock abilities you can have? And with Sammy, yeah, if YIIK can do something in 5 text boxes, it'll do it for 10 and Alex will recap for 20.
I reflected on her words. Girl contained the story started in thought at the time. Fabrication on Sammy was homeless. We found refuge in her cat. But still, I could tell I was missing something. She was much more energetic than any homeless girl I'd ever known. To what I was missing lay in her
Is that your hobby?
Is what my hobby?
Staring off into space and screwing up your face as if to say, what's going on inside my head is really important, so just let me think.
It's at this point, this behavior should be reined in, point made. Maybe Alex can start catching himself monologuing and stopping to show that, maybe Sammy had an actual effect on him. But no, it continues for the rest of the game uncommented on. It's clear reading the developer's logs that the writer, Andrew Allenson, is a voracious reader. A lot of the entries on YIIK's writing go more into his experiences and thoughts with novels than they do with game stories. He particularly notes the colourless Sakura Tazaki as the template for YIIK's structure, inspired particularly by its... You fucking with me. Its concise storytelling. Later entries cite Wind Up Bird Chronicle along with authors Pynchon and Wallace as inspiration for the writing. Alex's tendency to narrate events as though in a novel is also spoken about in the casting process. Another one of Andrew's writing blogs notes that Alex is meant to be a jerk, but still likable, which is interesting.
I wanted to make a game about a guy who's like a piece of shit, unlikable character who by the end of the game has to transform. People get it in a novel, but in gamers aren't, you know...
Well, hey, that blog also said people can change, and so can toons. That aside, what's clear is they put a lot of ingredients into Alex, but it results in no clear flavour whatsoever, and there's a bigger issue. Everybody else in YIIK is also absurdly verbose. It's not even a trait that makes Alex really stand out. It's just that since we see the world through his eyes, there is naturally a lot more of him. Literally, long story short, is that Andrew put the novelization of YIIK within YIIK, a prose modern RPG. I'm sure you can see the problem. Again, literally. Video games are an audio-visual medium. This is an RPG with models, maps, music, and text boxes. You have different tools to convey the story. Audio cues, camera shots, voice acting, sprites, text timing. YIIK neglects and doesn't use the tools its medium provides, not so much because it's doing a pastiche, as much as it is because it's taking the piss. I know the cat has a strange mustache. I know it's strange that Sammy doesn't know what an elevator is. Explaining what we're seeing is padding the runtime, and for what?
We are inside a room. We can tell from the decorations on the wall that it is a female's room.
It's taking me out of this world. Why try to infer, extrapolate, or invest myself if Alex is just going to tell me exactly what cues I should be noticing? You want to be a book, but you're just showing a total lack of spine. I do love this old entry which notes the plan is to get the player dungeon diving within 5 minutes of hitting start. Yeah, plans definitely changed. You spend 5 minutes with Crow, Cat, and Cock each before you're doing anything. The shame of it is, removing or toning down Alex's narration would cost the story nothing. YIIK genuinely has subtle beats that can be rewarding to pick up on. I think. I second guess all of them, since the writing is so often grating and so often just so much, that I don't see cleverness or subtlety with respect, but suspicion. If a person goes at a dartboard with a shotgun, it's not the same when they hit a bullseye. You don't need text for subtext. Subbing subtext for text takes a toll on texture and substance. Plus, now knowing Alex was supposed to be irritating according to what was convenient for Andrew to say at the time, there are better ways to communicate this than by attempting to give your audience Stockholm Syndrome. Honestly, him saying that a literary audience would get Alex is just insulting two mediums at once. I think they'd get what gamers got, that he's a flaccid prick. Alex isn't interesting or, well, novel. And games are not novels. Games have different strengths and drawbacks than prose and vice versa. I'm not saying games going for a novelistic structure can't work, but YIIK doesn't leverage the strengths of either medium. It just wants to be a goddamn book too much. I do have to raise the idea that Alex's often incorrect ramblings could be intended to contrast the imagination and interpretation a reader can have with a novel against the more set-in-stone elements of an audiovisual medium. If that was part of the reason for doing this, then it's just overly flowery and doesn't pay off in any significant way. And speaking of books, or in Proto-Woman's case, from them, that's an excerpt lifted directly from Murakami's novel After Dark. This apparent theft led to some backlash. Again, Andrew had an explanation at the ready, saying that it was indeed deliberate homage. Alex was unable to process what he was experiencing, and so his brain filtered it through a novel he's a fan of. So, you know, perfectly sensible. Alex, who was scared out of his wits in April 1999, started reciting the 2004 novel he's a fan of, before getting pulled into a mystery from 2013. What's daft is that this may not be total bullshit. I mean, the specifics are, but the rationale isn't. There is precedent for this explanation that we've seen. You just have no good reason to spot it. You can't blame people for being suspicious, especially from a studio that has been caught plagiarizing in the past. And well, you can't buy two brothers anymore, which makes the amount of references and reverence in YIIK all the more surreal. They've got a bloody statue of the main character and his wife in the town fountain, which, hey, maybe they look up to plagiarists. Really, it means YIIK isn't so much a shrine as it is a mausoleum. But before we move on, let's have a quote from Andrew.
I'm not Murakami, and I would never pretend to be him. So to a lot of people, they won't necessarily see the influence.
At the end, Sammy is taken as Alex is frozen in fear, and as he exits the factory alone...
The calm night wind of springtime seemed to contrast the inner workings of my brain.
He goes for over a minute on this shit. After everything that's happened, just shut the fuck up for a moment. Worse is, if you exit the screen, you have to sit in black while Alex finishes up, only for the mood to instantly be shattered by...
Confused by the images spinning inside my head.
And... this narration is so cack-handed, it made me think about something I'd never really noticed in games writing before. Characters really have to explain what they're doing and why, without assuming player actions. For Alex to brazenly narrate,
I was moving on autopilot back towards my home.
While I'm trying to open a chest and already tired of hearing him, it creates a strange demand to work with the writer to not break the already flimsy narrative. It goes hand in hand with YIIK putting its medium blending aspirations over good design sense. There's just such an incongruity already on display in the writing, the art, the gameplay, and the tone that all comes together in a kaleidoscope of crap. Oh hey Alex, the arcade opens tomorrow. Well, that'll take your mind off things. Then when we do get home, I'm greeted by this prompt. And I have to wonder, is YIIK knowingly taking the piss? Shit. Forgot the groceries.
I tossed my things on the floor and made my way to the couch. My mother, a 49-year-old, short, red-headed woman, was an information systems programmer analyst for Pacific Chime.
Wow. I mean, I was making a joke, but that's just as asinine. I get Alex is trying to ignore what just happened, but there is some whiplash.
You have mail.
We get sent a video, and this would probably be a joke about long download times and Alex being able to go off on a monologue, if that wasn't, exactly what he'd do all the time anyway. I love Timrod in his screenshot LP using historical precedent to give Alex faster download times and remove shit like this, as though that would help.
I just have to wait for it to finish downloading. When the file had finished downloading.
It's all for nothing anyway, because somehow this download leads to a forum page with embedded images. This is where it becomes clear that YIIK was inspired by the Elisa Lam case, but her death is only half the story. Andrew Allenson, and I swear I'm not trying to pick on him, he just comes up a lot in this story, was enthralled by the case. The game wasn't so much inspired by her death as it was his experiences on forums trying to piece it together with others. Through that, he became fascinated with writing a story about internet sleuths uncovering a big mystery.
I'm on a message board. Here are all these people. We're all trying to figure out what happened. What if I made a game where the main cast was obsessed with a similar story and explore the types of people who sort of put off growing up and getting real jobs, and all they do is play internet detective all day?
So I'm eagerly awaiting YIIK, where Alex takes on the Boston bombing. Jokes aside, I find it a fascinating starting point. It's a premise with potential, and YIIK will get tired of it moments after that potential starts taking form. But whether or not this explanation makes YIIK more or less off-putting and by how much is up to you. A lot of stories are drawn from the author's experiences and from real-world events. A lot of crime fiction is built on actual case files, so I'm not condemning the practice. It all comes down to execution, and YIIK's is baffling. We have a character who is a lot like his author, who is on a romantic crash course with a character who is a lot like a real dead person. So, Alex needs to go to bed, and Andrew needs a cold shower.
So, is this what a college graduate does? Spend hundreds of thousands of his mother's hard-earned money to lounge around all day?
Oh god, it's the most annoying character in the game. You may say, no Snake, that's Alex. And I say, yeah, that is Alex. The panda is Alex debating with himself. Now Alex, wanker that he is already a master of debating with himself. He hardly needs a toy to do it more. Alex berates Alex, and Alex would feel guilty if he doesn't at least go back and try to find Sammy, so bang, there's our motivation. Headed back to the factory hotel, remember when I said there was precedent for Alex narrating After Dark to himself? Yeah, That's Panda. See, this brings me to an issue of YIIK's world building. It's all well and good to say you want reality to be shattered within 5 minutes of hitting start, doubly so if you can actually pull it off, but you sort of need a reality to be broken first. YIIK uses a real world to give it a head start on that front, but assumes too much. The moment I'm off the bus in YIIK, I'm assaulted by a clash of art styles. Alex's run cycle is made to be sprite-like, there's gamey shit like a giant welcome sign on our lawn, and we're in a town that's inhabited by plot lines instead of people. I feel less grounded in Frankton than I do here. YIIK may be consistently shit, but this shit is at least consistent. Before the plot starts, I can leave town and get attacked by a monster. To the south is a village of monster hunters. This should all be walled off until we hit plot to help the illusion that things have gone from ordinary to extraordinary. When a cat seems to intentionally beckon us to a haunted house filled with ghosts, but it's not until we're on the far end of the place that Alex starts registering weird things as happening, it comes off like only now are things getting bizarre, since otherwise this all seems like a natural extension of a world where monsters roam the countryside. It's especially jarring because he's after a grocery list. He can't just wait for a new one, phone mum, or just put on his big boy pants and buy some groceries. He's risking a lot for a note he probably won't even read. And I get that this is all supposed to come off as quirky, but it's also incredibly flimsy and inciting incident when YIIK then turns around and reveals it's all meant to be taken at face value. So when I run into a talking stuffed panda, I'm very sorry that I didn't pick up that it's just Alex's subconscious talking back to him. It's not like he isn't already plush with narration without it. The game claims to be inspired by Earthbound as a shorthand for weirdness. It also wants to have the slow burn of a Murakami novel, the intrigue of real-world conspiracies, and the breezy pace of a postmodern game. And because it wants all of this at once, it can't adequately service any of it. The rhythms are all over the joint.
But this isn't really the catchy kind of song. This is that sort of thing.
I'm sorry everyone, we're this far in and only now am I getting out of the first dungeon. I'm saving combat for later. And it's not even that the opening is especially bad in comparison to the rest of the game. I'm sorry to say it'll actually get worse. Case in point.
Alex? You grew a beard!
This here is Michael. Alex's memories of him are hazy, but he recalls the two being friends despite their age difference.
He was a good kid. A bit younger than me. Usually worth a laugh or two.
What have you been up to? Just took the SATs. That's about it.
The two poke fun at each other before the topic turns to Onism, the website we were downloaded to last night, which Michael happened to have a hand in making.
www.onism1999.com.
Jesus, Michael, did you stop yourself short of saying HTTP as well? This gets them talking about Sammy.
After that went up, everyone on the forum started acting strange, like a sort of darkness had come over the website.
Alex, proceeding with caution and, well, getting really bloody creepy, says he thinks he was in the same elevator in which Sammy disappeared. Michael in turn gets creepier, and the two join forces to go back and investigate after Michael gets his new camera. And you may find this hard to believe, but this is where the breezy pace we know and love dies. Heading into town, Alex freaks out about the arcade we saw last night.
They opened it about 3 weeks ago. RPG games are seriously the best! Chrono Trigger, Lufia 2, Secret of Mana! Those games are like the holy grail of my youth!
We get dragged into the arcade for some panning shots. I think the girl behind the register is pissed that she missed 3 weeks' pay. Then we go and grab Michael's new camera. Cameras are Michael's weapon, vinyls are Alex's. So most characters have distinct shops. And, well, I guess it adds character, but more than that, it adds loading screens. The two head back to the factory hotel, where they come face to face with a strange being.
I've been scared before. Everyone has, but those past memories of fright were nothing compared to what we had just experienced.
Alex, you saw 3 of them yesterday. We're thrown into an unwinnable battle and the two have to run for their lives.
What the hell was that? What the hell is going on? What? We need to get your photos developed. This thing is digital, baby!
Appropriate, because in the next scene the story won't develop either. Good God, there are 5 chapters. Michael goes and grabs a transfer cable. Alex stands outside, feeling sad that he legged it sans Sammy again. And then back at Alex's, we get Michael's entire backstory dumped on us.
I was talking to my cousin about this recently. The lifelong implications of seeing something actually, undeniably supernatural. He has a 6-year-old daughter. Apparently, she told my cousin that when she looked into the mirror, she was smiling, but that she knew she wasn't smiling. Kids say weird shit.
So he's been interested in the occult from an early age, and runs a forum dedicated to discussing it. Yeah, that works. Why are you telling me? I'm Alex.
I spent a few weekends learning HTML, and before I knew it, Onism 1999 had over 15,000 hits each week.
Alex reveals he was actually there when Sammy was taken and the photos are uploaded to Onism. And what do we learn from this?
But more people wanted to believe than not.
That people believe them. Which clearly wasn't helpful as A Fade to Black skips us 2 weeks into the future. It's April 19th, 1999. Our heroes haven't died of pulmonary embolism and have just accepted there's an unkillable god entity 5 minutes down the road. They get a PM about a girl who can tear holes in realities and they decide to investigate. Which is just in time, really. Onism is going to have its minds elsewhere tomorrow. We head back to the arcade, the two creep on Vela, which leads into another unwinnable fight, albeit one we can't run away from. Afterwards, the two explain why they're here. So she asks if she can go and see the pictures.
Do you recognize the location from these photos?
That's behind the old grocery store. Obviously, you've been there before.
Yeah, can I get some directions? We're famished. What really happened here is the old Frankton map had a grocery to be behind, but they changed that and now there's only one grocery in the entire state, and throughout the entire game it never opens. Maybe Mum was just trying to get rid of us. And, well, less importantly, but if you check Onism, which you totally can, that's not the grocery. That's right in front of the Arcade. What's funny is YIIK has actually been taking it easy on us up until now. This conversation marks the first real winding road we have to deal with. It just throws endless asides and minutiae at you and gets really lost on the way to where it needs to go. This will become the norm and I'll cut the bullshit afterwards, but let me give you an example of conversation in YIIK now that Alex has other party members to deal with. Vela explains that she weaponizes sound to harm or heal things. Onism is explained in detail for about the 3rd time within the hour. Alex and Michael reintroduce themselves. Then the game is nice enough to skip over repeating the plot, since it repeated the plot to Michael twice already with various degrees of accuracy and length. But to make up for us missing this riveting tale that we were there for, we instead hear about Vela reacting to it.
Vela just looked into my eyes and never reacted. Something felt familiar about her. But not in the I've met her sort of way. Something deeper. I dated a girl in college who was a women and gender studies major. She said that she believes our soulmates were cut from the same section of that initial piece of matter.
This isn't quite foreshadowing. It's Alex's erection for Sammy casting a shadow like a plot sundial. This past crackpot girlfriend gets 5 text boxes. Alex explains Vela explaining the entities, then Vela explains the entities. That's unique, YIIK. You're bringing new angles to Tell Don't Show.
That's the thing with people, isn't it? You could show them all the mysteries of the universe, but if they're distracted by the human element of the tale, they'll shift all of their attention there.
Touché, but I'm not done talking about Andrew.
A short time ago, I entered into a dark place, both physically and metaphysically.
Vela explains her own fear of the entities, and Alex asks her to explain what metaphysically meant. And rather than saying she doesn't want to talk about it, she bangs on about the definition of the word. Well, isn't that clever, you snarky fuck? Alex calls her out on this, and Vela then does what she should have done in the first place and just said she's uncomfortable talking about the metaphysical.
Do you mean to imply that you've found a way to exist inside of a metaphysical space? That you...
Enough!
Alex then asks how she got so tough. So she gives him a phone number to access the metaphysical space of the Mind Dungeon and tells him to give her a ring if they run into anything metaphysical. Just, fuck, you want her in the party, YIIK, I get it. Why are you so awkward about yourself? Fucking okay. So, all this conversation needed to do was introduce Vela and the Mind Dungeon. It managed to barely do a little bit of both amongst so much padding. Yeah, I'm truncating shit from now on because this is just how YIIK operates. The conversations are like the jokes. They trip over themselves and the point gets lost along the way. This is why I don't blame people for not getting a big picture idea of YIIK, why I don't really blame people who have wildly different interpretations, and most of all, why I don't really blame people who just want to quote the funny dumb lines of dialogue and move on, since YIIK is always burying the lead through its own inability to stay on topic, and it just doesn't have the charisma to pull it off. It's all very hipster in that, you know, it can't be seen taking anything seriously and it's just a competition for the characters to out-asshole each other. It's a race to the bottom. YIIK is going for eccentric, stream-of-consciousness-like conversations, but it lacks the charm to make it worth the very long while. And it doesn't nail the tone since this all comes off as far too rehearsed to have a believable air to it. Plot details and character beats struggle to be heard or stand out amongst all the rambling, and some rambling is fine. There's no perfect ratio on this for good writing, but YIIK isn't even in the ballpark of a good answer. Okay, this was all too many words to say this game has too many words. So, to bring this section home, let's talk about Kojima. I like Kojima, but he's also guilty of this shit. Overlong conversations, rife with asides and filled with exposition.
3.
Wait!
What is it?
Let me take off my glasses.
But I like him. Here's where his style works. Kojima's stories are message-driven. Each game explores a bunch of ideas before ending on a big thematic statement. Genes deciding our fate, information control, the transient nature of conflict, all bundled alongside an enjoyable spy fiction romp. If you miss the point of a Metal Gear game or don't take any meaning away from it, you can still have a good time. When Kojima goes off on an aside, there's an earnestness to it. He's fascinated by a topic and wants to explore it. He hasn't stopped the story because I'm too cool to be straightforward. These asides serve to give a better understanding of the world and characters. In their context, the topics raised tend to warrant discussion. They have a purpose of educating the viewer and equipping them to better understand the literal aspects surrounding whatever themes are being presented.
I grew up on the battlefield. Conflict and victory were my parents.
This dialogue hardly sounds natural, but within Metal Gear Solid, it's believable. It informs the over-the-top, melodramatic setting and gives everything a great sense of conviction and purpose. And then, and here's the big one, here's the justifier. During a scene, Kojima remembers to advance the plot, even if only a little. This is all still indulgent, but Kojima at least puts in the work to earn it. Plus, you know, some shit is reserved for codec calls and cassette tapes.
You remember pre-ripped jeans?
These come off as cheap imitations of that idea, where characters ramble about loosely philosophical shit with nothing to actually say on a topic. It's just diluting the actual story. So Alex and Michael endeavor to hit level 5, find something interesting on onism, and use that to rope Vela back into this mess.
Just calling to see if you figured it out. It's your best childhood friend. I think Losing My Religion by R.E.M. had just become a big hit.
Nope.
That means grinding battles and cashing the experience in the Mind Dungeon. You know, this visual really sums up the YIIK experience. I know I'm talking about leveling before combat, so let me say this first. For most of the runtime, leveling up felt like it was achieving very little. Statistical gains were impossible to feel, and for the length of time leveling takes, well, it's all very much in line with everything else so far, isn't it? Here's how it goes. You enter a hallway, each door has a number over it. You set which stat you want, then you enter the door to lock it in. Do that for every door, then talk to the crow. It takes tens of seconds and far more button presses than necessary to achieve fucking nothing. Cashing in level ups after a dungeon takes minutes at a time, and this isn't because I need a lot of time to think, it's because the gameplay-based method of leveling artificially slows me down in a way a menu would not. I did discover you can set everything, then ask the crow to, quote, choose for you, and it won't change your picks, and that saves a bunch of Darth Vader blacks. And frankly, you're fine just letting Marlene pick for you. Even then, it's still slow and doesn't feel good. Leveling should feel like a payoff. This feels like submitting a report for the wildlife you killed. As you descend deeper into the Mind Dungeon, Marlene, the librarian, and other characters arise to tell you, something. I think it's about Alex's dad fucking off. I'll have to admit, this is one area in the game where I was just skipping dialogue. I could not bring myself to care. YIIK attempts, or at least pretends, to have a message of self-improvement and, ironically, awareness. The Mind Dungeon stands to represent these with its mind imagery and literal descent into the subconscious. Putting level ups, or downs in this context, is cool aesthetically, but everything about the execution is miserable, and Marlene is one insufferable character too many. Every time I'm in the mine dungeon, I am already resentful because of how slow it all is. I want to be doing anything else. So this is the worst time to throw story at me.
I don't know about you, but I feel stronger. I think you can see my biceps now.
Hell yeah.
The two check onism and have received another message. This time from a guy in Windtown whose sister also disappeared under odd circumstances.
This is interesting enough to bother Vela about?
Yeah, probably not bad.
Well, don't sound too excited. Vela bites, and the group sets off to Windtown.
And we sat on the bus with Vela and began to talk, and she seemed almost happy to see us.
I can tell. As we make a steady clip for Windtown and the camera clips for a seat, Vela gives us what little there is on Sammy.
Sammy Park was a 23-year-old Korean American. The police have no leads.
Are you Korean?
Do I look Korean?
Vaguely ethnic?
We're in the shadow of the erection again. Alex mentions they should go chat with the woman who reported Sammy missing, but things are about to take a turn.
My Sammy, and Sammy in the newspaper, may have looked the same. There was a difference there. I could feel it.
Man, I sure love that I'm piloting this fuck to Sammy. In Windtown, we get some odd insight into the group.
Hey, look! We're in Chicago!
Did you just laugh?
The party dynamics in YIIK are undercooked at best, and this gets weirder as more members join. Despite all that happens and how little time they really do spend together, the story treats them as friends right off the bat, because in RPGs, party members are friends? I mean, that's not true of all RPGs, probably not even true of most of them. But it feels like YIIK gets held back by a weird assumption that it then plays to, hobbling these characters along the way. We then have to ask around to find the missing girl and her brother. And back to the slow side of the pacing, everyone in Windtown is holding out on us. So let's talk about the combat. It's garbage. A turn-based battle system where each and every attack and defense is achieved via much maligned minigames. The biggest problem is this. If these minigames didn't exist, the battle system would still function and battles would still be sluggish. A lot of encounters are drag-out brawls with barely any strategy to employ. Weaknesses and status effects are in short supply and not worth the hassle. The handful of bonus abilities you get will all be weighed up on their damage potential, and for much of the game, it's a low figure. This is why it just devolves into using Alex's LP Toss. It has a low PP cost and does damage comparable to, or even better than his standard attack if you only land one hit. And it does it to enemy groups. So I just do this move over and over again because it's faster and puts less emphasis on me to do well. I was pumping strength as much as I could to get these battles over with sooner, but it took until late game for it to feel like min-maxing was really doing anything. All of the consumables are percentage based and cheap. I just sold every full heal I got and grabbed 50 pieces since the damage output on both sides is so low that I was never in such a dire situation as to need a full heal quickly. There are no decisive moments or unique enemies who can put you on the ropes. It gets even easier when we get a character later in the game with an ability to apply an item to the whole party. I was basically never in danger again. So it's slow and unengaging, and with the minigames we now have a 5 to 20 second stopgap in between the many attacks that have to be made to win battles. The gimmick loses its luster quick as it multiplies the length of battles many times over. To justify their inclusion, these minigames for their length should feel decisive. If I do a big combo with Alex's record, I should expect big numbers, like I really put the hurt on. But no, it's just one attack of many. If I'm having to dodge enemy attacks, maybe it should feel like I'm on a knife's edge. But no, they have such low damage that I just started mashing through these, since the only thing YIIK can't exhaust is my consumables. I hated every enemy that had a group attack, not just because it made the combat even slower, but group attacks for whatever reason had the most difficult and complex dodge bar. Dodging as one character, 1 press. Dodging as multiple characters, 3 presses each. Yeah, that adds up. Here's the worst part, the minigames, at least on the attacking end, they're concealing a fucking dice roll. While rare, enemies can still evade a successful minigame, and the damage, while it's within a bracket based on performance, is still randomized and never particularly impressive. The difference between one hit with LP toss and 30 is marginal at best. So if you're doing slow minigames, maybe make the combat take a handful of turns and make those turns mean something. I feel my focus dying fight by fight in the endless repetition, but it keeps demanding more focus so I can continue. It's not easy enough that I just get to stomp through, but it's not biting enough that it keeps the adrenaline going. It's finely tuned terrible. It's tiring. It's insidious. And that's really the word for Windtown. Not only is everyone giving us the runaround, but they're all boss fights. I was tired of the combat by the end of the first dungeon, but sick of it before the second. That said, I am going to give this place a compliment before we get to the meat of it. It has a well-established atmosphere and identity that's consistently presented and sets you up for the story beats that happen here. Between the sad music, downbeat atmosphere, and horribly broken people, Windtown quickly and successfully sells itself as a miserable place. An air of death and decay is pervasive. Which brings me to the god-awful graveyard gags, where the Allensons put themselves next to Iwata, who I guess plans to be buried here in 16 years. Hey, fun fact, Frankton was the birthplace of Kenneth Lay. Where's his grave? He died in 2006. He's beating Iwata here, Andrew. Now, this was meant as a nice gesture, but it's placed in a town that's filled with arseholes, and the other graves are all off-the-wall jokes. If you wanted to commemorate Iwata, it would have been more respectful if you just had him alive and somewhere nice, probably. Like, hey, the next town has a fucking beach, and it has Mario flags. Besides all that, it does raise some intrigue. This town is so miserable that before I even met the person I'm here for, I do feel bad for them. That person is Rory Manser, and yeah, he feels of this place, acting quite cagey and distrustful around the group.
No, I mean, what are your screen names? That's how I know all of you, so that'll be more beneficial.
And when we ask him questions, he dodges them and starts selling us an overly elaborate account of his sister's disappearance, which means we get ran through town while he goes on crazed, disconnected rants about the human soul.
I think we all have a set number of days to be in our bodies.
Eventually, Rory leads us to the sewers, believing his sister's soul to be down here. By this point, Vela's worked out what's probably going on, and despite her apprehension, decides it's best Rory faces the truth.
Okay, no, this will be fine.
Which leads to us coming face to face with another entity.
Oh, Rory, you are so wrong.
Rory believes this is the soul of his sister Carrie, and that we can in some way help her. But Vela explains what we're seeing, and well, I'll try. This here is a soul survivor. Rory's sister actually killed herself due to bullying at school. She is irrecoverably dead. And in his grief, Rory almost disconnected his soul from his body and slipped into the soul space, but he pulled himself back. So this is Rory, but it's not. In another reality, a separate Rory went through with it. The soul space is dangerous, and it warped them into this, before the entity wound up here.
Fella, can you please explain what's going on here?
She's trying, Alex. It's just convoluted. While dragged down by the philosophy lesson and Alex is yelling, there is a good character beat here, carried out with awful dialogue and taking too long, but hey, Vela had previously, also in too many words, made it apparent that she doesn't like discussing this stuff. But she puts aside her own discomfort to help Rory in a way that only she can while trying to give us...
Oh no, I think it's a golden alpaca! Damn it, we need to run!
Really feel myself vibrating with motion here. So, I was just very nice to Windtown. Too nice. It's actually so astoundingly awful that in my bid to understand YIIK, I've come to a conclusion. This is where YIIK, for the first time, shows its hand. People take YIIK for a clumsy game, and it is. I also think it's malicious. Rory dragged us here, gave us a big runaround, and then we learn he's hurting, his sister killed herself, and during this big emotional beat for him and Vela, the tone is shattered by a golden alpaca. Limited. It's hard to guess what this is meant to accomplish. A misguided attempt at lightening the mood? Poorly breaking up the story with some gameplay? Just plain fucking up? I take it as intentional, meant to confuse and frustrate. The entire game's been spinning our wheels. All Windtown is doing is slashing the tires. It's wasting the character's time in-universe and using its mechanics and structure to waste the player's time in turn, and to an exhausting degree. I'm okay with the Rory stuff. Him lying to you is foreshadowed heavily.
Hey, I invented lying on the internet, so no need to warn me.
So a player can get what his deal is and know there's something off. In a story supposedly about people on forums solving mysteries, it makes sense they would run into someone using the case for their own ends. Rory may be doing a bad thing, but he just wants his sister back, and the weird shit on onism gave him false hope. So that's a complex and cool beat, well done, but here's what fucks with you. We can visit Carrie Mance's grave, revealing that she is already long dead. We can't act on this knowledge. We have to play along. When we speak to this girl, the camera is even heavily angled against Carrie's headstone. And hey, the one time the camera's adding to the story, it's because YIIK is letting you see the wasted hour ahead. Perhaps we should have arrived as this grave is being dug, with the gravedigger blocking the inscription. When we head back to Windtown later, we can then see that this is indeed Carrie's grave. This isn't subtle, I'm sure most people would peg what's going on, but it does less harm to our false sense of agency and uses the world to deliver a plot that's moving. But, you know, this is me supposing YIIK wants to be good, like a sensible person. The gameplay structure of Windtown is as drawn out as possible. Obviously, there's the boss rush, where we have to fight everybody in town, revving up the plot engine so it can drive us into a wall. Rory then drags the player across town again, rooted in a way that starts you at your objective and leads you away, ensuring you have to do a whole lap of the town. Meanwhile, the sky has become strange and otherworldly, drawing the player into questioning things and setting a strange scene. No one even alludes to it, it's meaningless. I should be thankful that they let something sit, but since Alex has gone on tangents for far less, I find it suspect. This is how YIIK beats you down. It gets you expecting words, it keeps you on edge.
This is right. I think I can do it here.
You get 2 abilities in the dungeon. An obstacle clearer. Look, it's this whole bit in miniature. Then in the next room we get an obstacle clearer. Funny. There's no puzzle to these things, just menu fiddling and more time down the drain. In the end, after this slow, laborious build-up, where we're getting our first insights into the metaphysics, not only are they overly elaborate yet sort of flat, but Alex keeps dragging you away from the explanation to yell,
Bella, what the hell is going on? Bella, will you tell me what the hell is going on? What is all this about?
So, if a player does care at this point, they're caught between trying to unpack this bullshit while being invested in an emotional moment, and all the while, Alex keeps interrupting both. You've had so much time wasted already, but hey, maybe the tone's intact. And there it goes. A slow, laborious boss fight where soul survivors, the crux of the previous scene, are turned into jokes you need to destroy in an awful minigame turn after turn, because if you don't, they get eaten by an alpaca man to power him up. This boss fight is feeding off of Rory's grief for a gimmick. That's an unbelievable way to undercut yourself. Until this segment, I've been taking YIIK at face value, as I would any other game I cover, but I don't believe it's the story acting in good faith. It's wasting time so often, in so many ways, and for a moment, it feels like it pulls back the curtain and says, yeah, you're being fucked with. I'll end by saying I know I'm making a bold claim, and it's one that's awkward to move on from. If this game's intentionally a time waster, then coming at it head on is just playing into its hands. How can you fight something like that? For now, I'm just going to keep going, because after all, I can't be totally certain that this is the case. The main character's a hipster, and so's the game he's in.
What the hell was that thing? Why did we have to kill it? And what is going on? I've been sitting here for 30 minutes.
Following the golden alpaca, Vela may as well just say, so, before I was so rudely interrupted. Because she just goes right back to explaining the magic system. We get the tidbit that there can only be one physical soul per reality. One Alex, one Rory, one Sammy, and so on. This is more or less the rule that all future twists in the game hinge on. And this is frustrating, because it's obeyed and broken in near equal measure, which totals its significance. Vela also explains that entities are above petty desires. They don't really act, so it's unlikely they kidnapped Sammy. It's probably that Sammy has just left reality of her own accord and is totally gone.
My 12-year-old sister killed herself. She died right here.
No one cares about your sister right now. We almost just died ourselves.
So everyone starts yelling at Alex for his inconsiderate outburst, even though, yeah, they nearly all did just die and probably wouldn't be in the most rational state of mind. And then this happens.
Why did you just say that to Rory?
There is not one, not two, but 3 methods by which Alex fucking talks to himself. We have 3 narrative tools all doing the exact same thing. This is fulfilling exactly the same purpose Panda does, it just takes longer, and it means we're no longer safe outside of Alex's room. Giving YIIK the benefit of the doubt, it wants to gamify Alex's racing thoughts, having to walk between the many variations of himself as he pinballs between conflicting emotions. I'll demonstrate this in one line of dialogue that can replace it. We almost died though, I mean, I'm sorry, yeah, it's daft as hell, but so is this shit. Mine took only a few fucking seconds. This whole segment is a jumbled mess on top of everything else. To jump back to just after defeating the alpaca, first we get all that exposition, we cut to this robot crackling to life, then it leaps roughly a week into the future so Alex can say he hasn't talked to anyone since Windtown and narrate how sad he is.
The following week or so, my mood was strangely languid and serene. I hadn't spoken with Michael, Vela, or Rory in almost 8 days. I listened to cassette tapes of old music. Andrew Allinson, Andrew Allinson, Andrew Allinson. As I listened to the soaring strings and strangely syncopated bass line of Symphony 7 in E-flat by Andrew Allinson.
Then it jumps back to explain why, which, before we get out of the sewers, takes us through this puzzle dungeon. Then in the jump back, after yelling at Rory, it goes into Alex's mind and then back out to here. The cut forward just muddies the scene by giving it a needless framing device. I'm not sure why the narrative thread gets knotted up for a moment. It's as though, apropos of nothing, YIIK decides to make the scene play like a mind racing frantically, even though it never acknowledges this or goes for this type of framing ever again. It's just bizarre, and I suppose in a way, it does vaguely work for YIIK in an absurdly indulgent sort of way. It's still frustrating, unearned, and out of place, but fuck it. There's no other way to end this part than with the shocking reveal that YIIK did actually have an editor. At least according to Andrew.
This is seriously the last time I hang out with people I met on the internet.
Hold that thought. Rory makes his exit as the group remains pissed.
Dude! He was obviously just hurting.
I'm gonna go figure some things out. I'll be in touch when I do. In the meantime, try not to be such a jerk to your friends.
Hey, that kid isn't my friend.
Everyone yells the universe doesn't revolve around Alex, and on that depressing, I guess, bombshell, we jump those 8 days or a week or whatever into the future. 2 strange things happen here. First, the reveal that Sammy is totally gone barely seems to register. Alex knows it, but doesn't believe it. This doesn't so much knock the plot for 6 as much as it knocks the plot for 6 more hours of runtime. Worse is that Onism 1999's importance and the promise of internet sleuths greatly diminishes and the plot moves to other means of moving things forward. It's funny how a shift in focus can feel so haphazard after all the bugger-all that's happened, but it really does. YIIK can yet do less.
This is all fine and shit, but it doesn't bring my sister back.
This is especially frustrating since what just happened with Rory feels like a turning point of this thread. This could be where Alex and Michael realize they need to wisen up, pick their leads better, or hell, maybe just trust that they know better than Onism at this point. They've gone deeper. Maybe they could start gradually abandoning the forum as it dawns on them it's more bad than good. I'm okay with Onism's importance shrinking as the story goes on. In fact, I wish this was an actual topic of discussion, but it just sort of fades from relevance and it takes a certain character along with it. Onism continues to exist for lip service, but what exactly did it contribute when it was relevant? 2 private messages when we were written into a corner and 1 interesting observation? Which is that people on the internet lie? Well, great, really bring in the heat. You can actually browse Onism. It's a bit crap. The writing here is much the same as everywhere else. Contradictory drivel filled with unlikable bellends. But since it's based on a web forum, Andrew's writing is really in its element. Plus, it's the game's source of side quests, and besides the fact I don't want to help these people, this is a cute way to frame the extra content. Like the NPCs, it doesn't update much to reflect what's going on throughout the adventure. It's mostly just Michael making vague and asinine posts once in a while. It has the potential to be a cool diegetic way to log the story for the player. If things weren't so long-winded and there was text to spare, we could have Michael and later other party members posting threads asking if anyone knows anything about the factory, about entities and so on, get some insight into them. In turn, other people post things, which may be helpful, but may be baseless assumptions, or maybe they just start making up their own version of events, which could further reflect the vacuous and self-serving nature of places like this, a theme which is possibly in the game, but YIIK is unsure if it wants it to be. In this way, the player has a log of the overly convoluted events of the plot, and YIIK gets to actually say something about its subject matter. The way Andrew speaks of his time investigating Elisa Lam, it comes off like he's describing a hole he had to pull himself out of. So I figured that's something he would want to reflect in the story, that you can wind up getting too deep into web conspiracies. But the forum, like anything else, is just kinda there. Besides this, YIIK had 3 scripts: the cutscene script, the world dialogue, and onism. The cutscene script was finished first, with the other 2 written thereafter. But these 2 later scripts feel like they have little clue what happens in the story, like they only exist on cliff notes. They don't play off or reflect back on the plot, instead feeling written in isolation, which creates a setting that feels disjointed. With onism largely forgotten about, what was at the start one of the narrative's biggest pillars, or if not a pillar, a crutch to keep the plot hobbling on, has now been kicked out by its own author. This takes us into a bold new form of storytelling, where nothing happens for a couple hours and you can faintly hear an identity crisis. Alex's mum loses her job, which causes Alex to bitch and moan when she asks him to put his degree to use. This is the scene that gets across that Alex is a spoilt brat, which should remove the need for numerous monologues to that effect. We go and get rejected from 3 stores, and this is never brought up again. This reinforces once again pretty heavily what we already know about Alex, that he's a naive brat who puts his own selfish desires above those close to him. It's tedious, but it's story being told in gameplay. We're made to be doubly frustrated with Alex, since we had to drag his ass around before he himself makes it all for nothing. I don't actually mind games making me feel negative emotions if it's in service to something engaging and worthwhile. Here's the trouble. YIIK just attempted to make a point about something by wasting our time, which shows a frankly stunning lack of self-awareness. This is assuming it's not intentionally wasting our time at all times, in which case this is just par for the course. It then totally kneecaps this shortly afterwards in a conversation with Vela. Alex patronizingly tells her to leave work to come with him, and she rightfully points out his pig-headedness.
Yeah, I get it.
Wait, Alex. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have snapped like that.
Then apologizes for rightfully blowing up. So the time was wasted, then it wastes your time by making the time wasted pointless.
I want to make a game about a guy who's like a piece of shit, unlikable character who by the end of the game has to transform.
Look, I guess we're really trying to push Alex being a shit all the way. But don't have the party just roll over if you want to make a point about him having to change. Now sure, Vela then does lightly reprimand him, but trust me, it's for fucking naught. So, after the job hunt by the slack cunt, YIIK remembers the robot. So late in the night, an entity leads Alex up to an old radio station and gives him a record sleeve for the mystical Ultima LP Legend. Interesting cover there. And Alex works out it wants him to find the vinyl and broadcast it. When we go rope Michael into this...
Hi.
Is Michael home?
There is no Michael who lives here. Only... Oh. You must want the house next door.
Michael has inexplicably changed houses. Lousy foreshadowing. You can't even make a house a home. Alex has a freak out and Michael's mum says he's sick. Unable to find the LP at the Frankton music store, he decides to check in with Vela. She demands that we stop hunting for it, genuinely distressed. So Alex is going to keep hunting for it. Outside, we run into Michael and he's perfectly fine.
Oh, yeah.
The 2 join forces, and while we're in Windtown, we're dragged over to check on Rory. Something strange then happens. There are a handful of choices around Rory. It sticks out like a sore thumb since everything else in YIIK is predetermined or pointless. But with Rory, you can get him to kill himself. The reason I spoil that so casually is because all this does is change a few lines of dialogue. Either way, Rory rejoins the story and comes along for the ride, and I mean the ride, as YIIK now makes us sit through a bus ride, a train ride, a meal, and another bus ride, totaling 15 minutes of dialogue that starts off introducing Rory.
I'm a scene kid with a dead sister.
And with that done, it just keeps going on about nothing as we fruitlessly go from store to store. It's excruciating. We're eventually brought to Flagtown, where we meet the siblings Claudio and Chandra. Claudio goes on onism, and he saw the sleeve. Despite what just happened, what I said about onism is still true. They don't have the record, but he knows someone who might, and decides to take us to this old guy who lives in the mountains who might have a copy. This takes us through a cave dungeon. Not much new to say about this beyond the frankly disgusting amount it drags us over hurt tiles to progress. I'm glad I can kick Rory out of the lineup since he's the worst party member I've ever had. As opposed to attacking, Rory can elect a party member that he'll step in to take damage for. He can then swap his health and PP numbers to take more damage. Claudio actually does noticeable damage, and Chandra's aforementioned spread item ability means you never need think in combat again. For a measly 2 PP, you can make a restorative 4 times as efficient. It invalidates Rory the same way the story invalidates Michael. Up top, we meet Mark.
Mark sponsored the Bring Him Home concert for my cousin who fought in the Gulf War.
That was long before you could even walk. Hell, I was a kid then.
Is Chandra meant to be 11 years old? He doesn't have the record, but looking at the cover, he knows who made it.
Ah, yes. The Mystical Ultima LP Legend by Vela Wild.
Did you say Vela Wild?
We got the record an hour and a half ago. That time has now been wasted. And Mark, who for the record might actually be the most smarmy cunt in the game, he doesn't give this information up easily. We have to sit through 10 minutes of him talking about tea and metal before this reveal.
I had a partner, a very good man.
That's great, Mark. We'll never see you again. You know, I think Alex is illiterate. Genuinely, this guy can't read. Each plot point hinges on this. A grocery list, a headstone, and now worst of all, a record sleeve. Let's show that sleeve again. It fucking has him on it! How does that not pique the interest of someone as self-absorbed as him? It's not even a matter of arrogance. Anyone would immediately want to know who the hell did this, then sue them for money. By now, the moral of YIIK seems to be reading shit saves your life. I'm amazed Alex hasn't killed himself missing a high voltage sign before he even got to college. I am wondering if Alex repeatedly missing obvious clues, overlooking things, and getting into danger chasing bad leads is a commentary on this form of amateur internet manhunt. If that's what YIIK wants to communicate, it's taking a pretty subversive route to genuinely waste your fucking time. This is especially bad when it seems to be the only trick it has in its playbook. Let's look at the strange juxtaposition this chapter has now created. Both the job hunt and getting the record were wastes of time, but Alex did actually make a roundabout form of progress towards the record, and got a hell of a lot more money indulging in his paranormal bullshit. Now, I know money is a gameplay element, but besides that, he also got 2 new people going along with him. This feels like the opposite of the message you're going for. Now to be an arrogant piece of shit, if I was writing YIIK, I'd have Alex get a job in this part. He'd turn up once or twice, but lose it pretty damn quick, skipping shifts to indulge in his hunt for Sammy. Alex not getting a job basically takes the fault off of him. It makes what this part is going for fall flat. He tried, but it didn't work out, and hey, that clears his schedule for tracking down Sammy. He should try, succeed, and squander it for his bullshit whims. Which would make this bit with Vela bite a little bit more. She needs a job, and this arsehole really doesn't. I took the piss on how it feels like Andrew flipped his story on Alex, but playing YIIK, I buy that at some point intent truly changed and Alex is meant to serve as a warning. I refuse to believe someone could fuck up likable this bad. But it feels soft, it doesn't communicate well, and this is because YIIK is limp. Now, back to the record, Alex really isn't the only one at fault. Claudio says he saw the cover! Is he not going to ask any follow-up questions about the fuckers standing in front of him? Jesus Christ, I just realized this is a shit version of what Neuro did. The difference is, I'd have beaten Neuro 15 hours earlier and walked away feeling like I got more out of it. Outside, YIIK goes for a victory lap and has Alex re-explain the plot to Claudio and Chandra.
I met Sammy Park. I had followed a cat into an old factory. A bit odd. The soul survivors, Vela. The soul survivors are... She said that these beings have soul space. Rory had reached... Then I found out that radio tower... I didn't expect you to believe me.
The two understand Rory's pain, having lost a younger brother a long time ago. This gets heated.
I had a kid brother, you know. He went missing in 1985. No one really ever investigated it. Sure, they looked around for him. And for a week they had a task force.
You act like they even tried. A 4-year-old black kid goes missing in a shit neighborhood, and you think they really tried?
And look, it's all well and good for YIIK's white writer to try and score some points along the way, and it would probably come across better if a white girl didn't die earlier and the police didn't care then. And let me tell you something that will make this guilt trip lose a lot of impact. This is setting up YIIK's one and only punchline.
Don't you think it's weird that a young woman goes missing in your town and only people talking about it are some weirdo kids on the internet? You guys get off on it in a way, don't you?
Easy now. Okay. Let's go find this record.
You guys are coming along? Awesome!
Regrettable move, Claudio. The gang then goes back to the arcade. Alex makes a bad apology to Vela, and the plot makes her okay with doing the very thing she asked Alex not to.
Who are... Oh, Michael. Rory. New friends? Hey, new friends.
He then asks to go into Vela's mind dungeon to get the record. In the one time I'm on board with Rory, he asks how Alex knows the record's in her head. The game says shut the fuck up. I'm also on board with this because it led to less words. Vela's dungeon is perhaps the best in the game. It explores Vela's past through environmental cues and implication, and her musical nature is explored thoroughly through the dungeon's design. To get the record, we have to go to various corners of her mind and gather parts of her together to form a band, with more instruments being added to the backing track as we clear dungeon segments. It's all centered around the stage. Sammy's in here for whatever reason. Besides that, I've worked out why she looks so mad all the time. She mixed up which game she's just a cameo in. With the introduction of the skateboard, we even start doing some puzzles again. Though it must be said, I really dislike YIIK's puzzles. Each puzzle room is built to be as spacious as possible, and I get this is partly to obscure solutions and force you to try and hold the space in mind, but it also means there's just ages of trekking across rooms to test things out. Let's talk about music. It's a mixed bag. There's a handful of tracks I like besides the one composed by Toby Fox. But during play, I noticed something strange. The music I disliked, I wasn't just thinking, wow, this music's bad. I was often finding myself telling the music to shut the fuck up.
I feel like too many composers try to sound like Uematsu. I don't blame them for imitating the Final Fantasy soundtracks. I've done it. I made a career out of it. But lately I've been craving my own voice.
Well, you found it. Still, there are some genuinely good tracks in amongst. The theme for Alex communicates his character better than the game does. Acoustic instruments tell us he's a hipster and the beeps and boops tell us he's a dork. The voices in the background steadily rise to demonstrate his growing importance, but this isn't dignified chanting. It's a pompous idiot becoming more important than he realizes or deserves. This track is used for motifs in the Mind Dungeon and for later reveals, nice subtle hints that connect Alex to concepts and other characters. But that's not just getting ahead of myself, that's getting out of the game. If you just take YIIK on its own, Andrew communicates better through music than English. You'd think this track would be 10 minutes long and have 2 minutes of random ska and a spoken word bit from a Murakami novel, but no, this music communicates a clear story in good time. The variety of battle music is one aspect that helps with how long and repetitive battles are, but it's a real crapshoot when I find a majority of the music grating. Plus, there's an annoying incongruity when the game asked me to tackle rhythmic minigames while the soundtrack doesn't quite play along. By putting the band together, we're able to find the LP deep in the recesses of Vela's Mind Dungeon, but before it's broadcast, the group gets together to listen to it themselves. That bad, huh? Yeah, the reception makes Vela run off. Alex goes after her, and it's Halloween now. Wasn't it spring earlier today? Don't get me wrong, I feel like I've lost months of my life, but this isn't right. This section of the story is where metaphysical rules and mystical bullshit just gets dumped on us in big dollops. Most of it meaningless twaddle meant to send the viewer in circles. On that note, Vela's backstory. She got cheated on in another reality and wound up hopping to ours a year ago. Besides the usual eye-rolling wordiness, this story is delivered like a creepypasta where the author uses absurdly precise measurements.
It was May 22nd, 1996, at 3:02 a.m., May 22nd of 1997. At 3:02 p.m. till 3:02 a.m. It was May 22nd, 1998, 12:01 p.m.
It's hilariously distracting, like every time Vela's sad she had to check her watch. Oh, 3:02 a.m. Crippling depression. Vela, could you tell me where half a year went besides down the drain? Anyway, then we get a choice to try and kiss her. Putting aside the foreshadowing in Alex's pants, the crew heads up to a radio tower.
For everyone, time is measured differently.
Clearly. Play us off.
Witness.
This powers up the Essentia 2000, who immediately establishes her power level by taking out some entities. This'd look cool if it wasn't YIIK. And the vision of this conks Alex and Vela out.
It was the woman made of plastic that I've been dreaming about. She was stuck in the van, but we need to find her.
Outside, Rory asks a life or death question.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry.
The next morning, Alex reflects on his unexplainable connection to this android, feeling like he's known her for a long time.
How can a woman made of plastic be loved so much by a real flesh and blood human?
That's not an honor hole I want to go down, Alex. There's a ton of last-second foreshadowing in a painfully dragged-out conversation about Vela's reality and the nature of death.
I had this dream, and in this dream, I was loved unconditionally.
Sounds like a dream. So, who was she? Was it Sammy Park?
No, I don't think so. Maybe it was. Maybe it was you. Maybe it was the android in the van. Maybe it was all three of you as one being.
Meanwhile, Rory found the van in a bunch of pictures on onism. So in the end, I guess it's good to get into conspiracy forums. Wait, shouldn't Michael have been the one to do that?
You have died.
I'd say I don't get YIIK's party, but there's nothing to get. They're dull on their own and don't bring out anything interesting in each other. Michael was, well, not interesting, but useful at the start since he knew more than Alex about the paranormal. Then Vela comes along and just plain knows more than him. That's, workable. I mean, he still has onism. Oh wait, that's not important anymore. And we're trusting information from fucking Rory now? So, what's the point of Michael? He's redundant. All he does is step in to take pot shots. I don't think he even wants to be here. He's bored. Vela should either be his worst nightmare or holy grail. This is someone who's hopped realities. But besides this one moment, I can't recall them ever really interacting. Speaking of, every beat involving her has Alex doing the exact opposite of what she asks, then her rolling over and going along with it, which totally undermines how she's introduced as capable and headstrong. Rory just has no good reason to want to keep hanging out with us at all. Claudio and Chandra are nice. Aside from when Michael cracks jokes or when Vela and Rory get annoyed by Alex moments before he's forgiven, everyone just vaguely gets on, and that's boring. I think the party shouldn't be held together by this barely believable, boring friendship, but instead by friction and obligation, which is pretty much there, just never brought up. Chandra is really interesting and tragic in this regard. In the party's shared theme of responding to grief, she doesn't really remember her twin brother. It's a grief that's foisted on her that she can't truly connect to. She feels more bad about Claudio, who has not only been unable to move on, but is now getting roped into hunting for Semi-Pack. Then in every scene thereafter, this trait just doesn't exist, which leaves her with nothing. Where'd that conflict go? Michael and Vela should be butting heads. Michael has spent ages on his forum, then Vela rolls in with her experiences which contradict what people have told him. This is a way to give Michael some actual character and things to talk about. Plus a reason for Vela to explain the paranormal in smaller doses throughout the plot rather than in 2 giant goes. They should bicker and argue over how these things work.
No, that's not right. That isn't how this works.
Meanwhile, Alex just uses both of them to go after Sammy. Now, this would make Alex more unlikable, and the thing is, Alex's problem was never that he's unlikable. Him being unlikable is the point of his character. The problem is that he's boring. There's nothing in him an audience would want to watch. Making him more clearly driven and manipulative would make him more defined, and as such, make it easier to demonstrate him changing. Alex shouldn't even act interested in the paranormal outside of how it can get Sammy back.
You acted like this was connected to Sammy!
Messing with forces he doesn't care to understand, not as a bumbling idiot, but a headstrong one. This would make his relentless pursuit of Sammy more believable, even as it's made clearer to him that she's definitely gone. Michael should be encouraging Alex just so he can follow along and have shit to post on Onism about, fulfilling his own selfish whims. Vela at first feels something of her own connection to Sammy as someone else who jumped realities, albeit a bit more willingly, and comes along out of her own sense of obligation. And well, that would shatter a bit with her revelations over where Sammy went, but hold with me a second. Rory could then be driven by a misguided attempt to make up for the alpaca incident and fill the void with these people. Maybe the others shouldn't even invite him along, he just comes. This may sound like a worse reason to hang out with the party, and admittedly it is, but at least it's self-motivated and gives the character an angle. Vela then sees Rory roll in with the group and thinks, oh god no. And now sticks around because she feels the need to keep an eye on him around fuckface. She was the one who walked him through his trauma in Windtown. She opened up for his sake. Sammy's gone and this kid isn't in the best place either. That's part of my problem with YIIK. The party barely interacts with each other. It all goes through Alex, and his dynamic with everyone is very samey and bland. It may sound like I'm just trying to make the party more miserable, but that is not the intent. I just want them to actually act. I want most of the bullshit words cut out and replaced with the characters actually having character. And for that, they need an actual motivation and actionable interpersonal hooks. YIIK acts like vague grief should be enough to hold people together, when really that should be what makes them meet, before being set aside for something that actually builds upon it. Claudio and Chandra lost their little brother in circumstances similar to Sammy. And well, just actually use that shit Chandra talked about. There's a nice melancholy dynamic to play on here, squandered like every other character. The older brother old enough to harbour that pain, and the twin who was too young to really experience it. Besides this, Claudio is older, a bit wiser, unerringly friendly, able to de-escalate situations. Maybe he could actually start trying to smooth over the group's beef and get them getting along better. But instead of capitalizing on any of this, instead he's the butt of otaku jokes that don't really fit the time period. Meanwhile, just speaking personally, Claudio is my favourite character since he's at least passionate about anything. YIIK is going for a cast of quirky, damaged characters brought together by fate, but their common ground is flimsy. As you meet party members, they drop their story on you in a solid chunk before just going along with whatever Alex does. The fact YIIK then insists that everyone likes each other is dull. It only leaves their most superficial elements up for exploration. They just come off as barely human with the bullshit they let slide. Give them some fight. Let them actually express themselves. Maybe they could actually develop this way. I get that asking for character development in YIIK is like asking if a stone could spare a little blood. But hey, I'm an optimist. The next part sucks. You have to go and look at Onism, which gives you the van locations. But if you head to them, they won't exist. We can't see them until we go and gather the party by talking to everyone and bumming a ride off Claudio. It could not be signposted worse. It took a while to find the bloody party. Would you guess Chandra is by the Frankton fountain? No, you wouldn't. Because there's nothing to her character. All I know is she works in Flagtown. So I went there. A good game wouldn't make me cross the whole map. But YIIK would. But it doesn't. I can't trust it. I haven't. Then, in a moment of restraint that must have taken every fibre of Axe being, you can find the van on your first go and skip a ton of fluff.
Holy crap! Isn't that it?
Can anyone pick a lock here?
Yo, wouldn't it be hilarious if I could? Like, out of this ragtag band of misfit friends, the black guy could pick the lock. And don't pretend you didn't think it. So to answer your racist-ass question, I cannot pick a lock. Well, at least not a car lock. I went through a Sherlock Holmes phase and learned to pick basic locks. You know, antique locks, Egyptian wooden pin locks, a warded lock, RFID locks if I had the right equipment, but definitely not a car lock.
So, just to clarify,
We chase a bunch of mole rats and uncover that the robot is being driven around by soul survivors, and Vela's confused. As she explained earlier, soul survivors are beyond any real needs and just exist. Vela's questioning it so the player won't, because it won't be answered. Alex enters the van and is immediately pulled elsewhere. By now the game has gone so far up its own arse that this is the loading screen. And the dungeon ahead is another late stage piling on of plot. But here's something fun. Around this point the combat starts to break. The strength stat and LP toss just start messing up, leading to Alex doing hundreds and eventually thousands of damage per turn. I haven't even been grinding. Hell, I've been avoiding fights where I can and my stat allocation has been haphazard at best. I just waltzed into this. But it makes YIIK more tolerable, so I'll take it.
I am the Essentia 2000. My consciousness is natural, but my physical form is man-made. I exist in all realities simultaneously. You had the pleasure of making the acquaintance of a Miss Semi Park. I was there. I am Semi, and Semi is me. When one soul leaves a reality, another can freely enter. The only requirement necessary is having some relation to the departing soul, whether it's being a parallel version of the departing or having an emotional connection to the departing. When Semi left your reality, I entered. I am the Essentia 2000. I am Sammy Park. I am Vela Wild.
Well, I said I wouldn't, but down I go. Essentia further explains this strange, solipsistic multiverse as we meet parallel versions of Vela. A similar story plays out across dimensions. Vela is mostly an Asian woman with shit taste in men. They fall for that universe's Alex, who uses them and runs off, leaving them suicidal. This somehow makes Rory the Vela of our reality, but you can't kiss him and leave him, it's one or the other. Yeah, you can try and kiss Rory.
As Vela, you gave me back my music.
You're saying I'm the asshole that used Vela and...
I buy Alex using any opportunity to mope, but man, this whole dungeon's theme of a person's capacity for cruelty is so meandering and juvenile. This stupid bloody rage face comic has a more nuanced take than the mountain of words thrown at us here. I can't believe I'm capable of such a thing! Good news, Alex! You're not! You've got no game! Souls don't have to match up in appearance, gender, or time period. There's just one of you in each reality that's as similar as needs be for dramatic convenience. Every Vela is totally different, but Alex seems to just be instantly recognizable to this Japanese guy.
This is not a lifetime I can recall. The norm for, say, my life as Oda, compared to my life as Yuzu, are so starkly different.
What you're looking at is another absurdly roundabout bit of foreshadowing, and YIIK has used this same trick before, but like the one soul rule, it's fucky with it. A lot of death imagery follows, with Alex needing to sacrifice himself to progress. You know, I'm more shocked by Alex having no reaction to this than the scene itself. Still, let's just go on trusting Essentia, why not? As this dungeon goes on, I start feeling like YIIK doesn't even really have a story. What it has is a collection of info dumps and justifications for the story it wants to be telling. Whenever I feel like I'm approaching understanding or meaning, a single line of throwaway dribble will obfuscate whatever I thought was being said. Random crap happens that doesn't have any purpose but to send the player in circles. YIIK just says whatever the hell it feels like, safe in the knowledge that there may be another line of dialogue elsewhere that excuses it. At the end, Essentia takes Alex back to his own mind dungeon, and opens a hall of parallel lives that we're not allowed to look at. Something about speeding through Alex's mind feels wrong. If this was really Alex, there should be a conveyor belt moving us backwards at all times. At the end of the hall, we get one last grim reveal. Alex's worst quality: destruction. Eventually, and Alex brings every reality to its end, and at the turn of the millennium, ours is to follow. This is inevitable, and there's no fighting it. Another Alex will descend and snuff us out. Essentia then makes an offer, that Alex and his friends commit soul suicide and escape before the impending doom. But Alex decides they'll stand and fight.
It pleases me that you want to fight for something. I know this isn't your usual way. Together, we can attempt to fight this ender of realities.
You think you're making it into the party lineup? Back in reality, we had apparently been missing for a few days, and no one but our mum seemed to care. Which is probably the most telling move the party has made so far. She's got a new job that lets her combo a whole bunch of title drops.
Y2K, Y2K.
Y2K? Y2K, Mom?
Oh, Mum, it's pronounced YIIK. An act can pat themselves on the back for a job well done. Well, time to tell everyone I'm back.
Rory committed suicide.
Well, shit, sorry to ruin the good news, but I'm back.
We went to his funeral last night. Where the hell were you?
You were there when I disappeared, when I was gone, when I reappeared, when Vela meets Essentia. She doesn't question that this robot is apparently also her when she was the one who explained how this whole physical soul shit works, and I guess she just takes it that robots don't count. But that doesn't matter, she's up for dying for the cause.
I've explored the soul space, and I've seen the beginnings of destruction to many realities.
Have you forgot which one of you is the robot?
Go and find each one of your friends individually.
The good news is YIIK recognized that Michael was finished as a character hours ago, so they've reinvented him. So Michael explored his soul space and experienced his parallel lives. In all of this, he learned he's Michael.
I want to train in the Mind Dungeon and be ready to fight this thing when it comes for us. You down?
Dude, you gave me hope again. You brought a sense of adventure back in my life that I thought had vanished with my little brother.
Claudio, we did 1.5 things together. I borrowed your car and drove Rory to suicide. But if you're happy to be here. With the apocalypse incoming, a calendar system is added. You may be thinking this is a lot like Persona 3, and YIIK certainly does, seeing as it's just lifted the ending wholesale. Well, the bad news is you're both wrong, and opening the door for Persona comparisons this wide doesn't do YIIK any favours. They should have nixed it. Our goal is to die swole, and each day we have 3 options. Hang out with friends, dealing with a cutscene for a free level up. Go outside and explore, with a certain number of battles or clearing a side quest ending the day. Or enter the Mind Dungeon, which, yeah, buy time. There's just not enough to even do. There's such a small number of these friend events that they can be exhausted long before the end. I cleared all but 1 side quest with time to spare, and that was after I got bored of just walking back and forth through Alex's door to burn time. This section should have set friend events to certain days and just toss in some new late game side content to fill time. As it is, YIIK is constructed in a way where you can exhaust most of the content that would pad this half-baked month out long before you get here, and it's not even close to filling it out if you left it for now. And this is all ignoring the better option of just cutting it. Thematically, YIIK has half of one of Persona 4's big themes of confronting the uncomfortable aspects of yourself, but not the more important part, about putting the work in to improve or forgive those parts of yourself with who you want to be. Alex has spent a lot of the game aware of and begrudging his flaws, but all he has done is cathartic self-flagellation. More realistic? Maybe. Makes for a good story? Not without the narrative understanding that this is what it's doing and acting on it. It's like YIIK is never certain where character development should begin and keeps putting it off, which makes the whole message and resulting Persona inspiration astoundingly ironic. Andrew is aware of the Persona franchise, and it feels like a bigger influence than Earthbound at the end of the day. Honestly, he should have been looking at Persona 3 for party dynamics. There is a dysfunctional group that starts coming together after a good deal of friction. But really, YIIK is more like a Netflix adaptation of Persona 4, where no one on the production staff really cared about the source material, the original message is pared down, and it just feels clumsy and like it wants to be something else but can't really be its own thing.
So don't act like I'm some anime character.
Don't worry, Vela, I won't. You're coming up short. And this is all alongside the fact that while these themes are present, the game itself is indulging in 2 of Alex's big flaws. It's greedy and shallow, throwing whatever it wants into the mix without consideration for whether it benefits the overall experience. And this isn't just in the writing, but in the mechanics. The mini-games, the Mind Dungeon, a lot of the puzzle-solving tools, and now this calendar. It's all unrefined. It asks you to play with toys for far longer than they're engaging, so it's only natural I start trying to find shortcuts. This doesn't help the story either. In what I can only guess is an attempt to heighten a sense of impending doom, it just winds up making it feel further off as I keep slamming a door on myself. As the month comes to a close, multiple scenes start pulling back the curtain. Michael has a freakout since he feels he's the only one who's been noticing that reality is starting to shift. Alex doesn't ask him about moving house, and honestly, it's a little distracting that this breakdown is accompanied by YIIK's best visual gag. Let's have a quick game of Spot the Difference. Just ignore the cuts and the color of the text boxes.
You want to hear the really funny part? When I went and lived all of my parallel lives, I was him. I was on a computer, talking to me. Now tell me, how the hell can a computer connect to a chat room something is screwed up here, guys? You want to hear the really funny part? When I went and lived all of my parallel lives, I was him. I was on a computer, talking to me. Now tell me, how the hell can a computer connect to a chat room that is in another reality? Something is screwed up here, guys.
Don't worry, Michael. I'm noticing.
Okay. Why the hell haven't any of you asked why the entities were driving the android around? Bella, you said it yourself. Soul survivors do not kidnap people.
Wait, hang on. What just happened? Did you just finish your 18-hour break from relevance? You were awake when she said that?
Tomorrow, we can sort this out.
They will not sort this out tomorrow. The game is really not subtle that we shouldn't trust Essentia, and I just realized it's Alex doing it again. He's not reading things. Panda more or less spells it out.
Didn't Michael move away when he was 10? Didn't they move to Canada when his dad got that publishing deal? Didn't you and Michael have a falling out?
At some point, Alex jumped realities. And you know, this starts fine. Michael moved away and Alex forgot that. Perhaps from the grief of losing this bundle of charm. Those weird phone calls we keep getting? Well, that's old universe Michael taunting us for some reason. Which, hey, means Alex's dick and Michael being a dick are both limp foreshadowing. But he's just now realizing he hasn't seen his dad.
You don't have a dad.
Which, well, there's a lot to unpack there.
My dad worked for Pacific Chime. Not my mom.
My mother. A 49-year-old, short, red-headed woman was an information systems programmer analyst for Pacific Chime.
And come to think of it, the whole town's different. Which leaves us with two possibilities. One is that they didn't rewrite this dialogue from when they changed the Frankton map, since it doesn't even remotely describe the area. And you know, this is possible, but we've got more evidence for option 2. Alex is the dumbest fucker alive. Hey, where'd this forest come from? Says the man who missed the woods for the town. Fuck Alex taking extra semesters to finish college. Never mind illiteracy. Never mind that, spoilers, Essentia is lying to us. I think he's struggling with object permanence. It's a criticism cop-out, but honestly, the fact I even have to question this is telling. Making Alex an oblivious dipshit has been hammered home, and it sure is convenient, but it's getting ridiculous. It's also implied that we may have hopped realities at a couple more points along the way, or that reality is just deteriorating so hard that we're getting displaced in time and space. So that time skip? Maybe we jump realities. So that arcade opening weeks earlier? Maybe we jump realities. So plagiarizing a book from the future? Hoo boy, are my legs tired jumping through these legal hoops and the realities they come with. This is why I said the world dialogue should change over time. If reality's changing, maybe changes should be reflected in the world. Maybe people besides Michael should have swapped houses from time to time. Maybe new dialogue and a sense of place getting distorted would benefit an attentive player and make it clear that this is what you're going for. Hell, I've got a play for you right here, YIIK. On that calendar system a moment ago, occasionally skip a day or two. Draw no attention to it. Just fuck with people under the hood in ways that are kind of playful. YIIK isn't a big-budget AAA studio game, so I'm not asking for big changes. I'm asking for them to pay attention and use what they have. It's awfully interesting how out of the infinite realities we always land where God hit copy and paste. I'm not sure what happened to the Alex we've replaced if that's what's happened here, but I'm sure he had it coming. I better go and find whatever new Rory has slipped in and tell him his sister already left the building. In a well-written story, this would be the slam dunk everything's building towards, where a bunch of gaps can now be filled in by the player as they head into the finale. And I'll give YIIK credit. The more I think about it, there are a lot of little things clicking. Like the double barrel of that guy approaching the dartboard. The timing of this couldn't be funnier. It's like the first dungeon all over again, but now it's been a whole year of weird shit. But 12 hours before the finish line, Alex thinks for 5 seconds and goes, "Hang on, this is bollocks." As a hipster may throw up irony as a defense mechanism to ward off criticism, YIIK has erected a multi-planar hipster barrier on the entire story. Any inconsistency in the plotting now has blanket coverage because whoops, I slipped and cracked my ass on another reality. Whoops, the only person who knows the whole story is being selective with the truth. Which parts? well, fuck off and fuck you. On the 31st, the crew sets off to spend their final day in New York City. I actually quite like this graphical change. I'm not sure why, but I took it as Alex being so stressed out about reality ending that he's just processing it this way. How funny is that? It's actually just that reality is on the fritz, so I got it wrong both times.
Would you like me to clear some things up?
We get her version of events. Proto-Michael was deemed too interesting and kicked out for a carbon copy of the old one. Vela and Sammy are the same, but Essentia took the place of Sammy when she left, and hang on a second, that doesn't even begin to make sense. Plus, Vela arrived here a year ago, but Sammy only left recently, and there's one soul per universe, so that just doesn't work. But Essentia is Vela and Sammy, but she's here, and she's probably lying to us, so they're probably not related at all, and that's the only way it could work, and god damn it, it lines up. I'll admit, it's wrong of me to be annoyed when YIIK doesn't fuck something up. It's like, god damn it, I was gonna hold this against you, but I gotta concede, YIIK, you got one over on me. This being the case, however, it's pretty fucking sleazy to put Sammy and Essentia in Vela's mind dungeon. It's cheeky to give Vela and Sammy the same minigame to imply connection. It's low to have Vela also get knocked out when the Essentia's woken up. Like I said, there's just so much. Something will line up and be contradicted elsewhere. YIIK is spitballing, and there's actually a pretty big line between a red herring and out lying to your audience. Also, apparently there's copies of the party in every reality and they near enough always wind up together or something, and since reality had started breaking at whatever point some time ago these lot came in, they're not native to this reality, but we are, so did we swap realities or not? Who fucking cares? There's probably more lines in here somewhere that support or deny that claim, and I'm repeating an explanation that obviously doesn't matter.
I hadn't found this strange. It was also obvious from the start. This wasn't my reality. Mind dungeons, cats with mustaches, beautiful women who come in and out of my life, mysterious pan-dimensional androids. This wasn't my life. Of course something had to be wrong. I had sensed it all along, but I was so intrigued by the fun and mystery of it all. Fun.
After a day in New York, as midnight approaches, the group arrives in Times Square.
What the hell is that?
Remember when I said Rory dying just changes a few lines of dialogue? Well, there you go. They forgot to account for his absence. But hey, maybe reality's breaking, right guys? I mean, the game even kicked Proto-Michael out and replaced him with regular Michael.
Isn't that Alex's face? Holy shit!
Everyone! This is it! Prepare Michael! You're back!
I never left.
Oh no, wait. Oh no, he's gone again. But hey, maybe reality is breaking, right guys? A friend of mine had repeated softlocks on this boss. It took them an hour to whittle through since it could just bug out at any point. But hey, maybe reality is breaking. It's not really a final battle. It's more a vinyl battle.
LP toss!
Give your final words to me. I'll take a leave of absence from walking by the sea. There's a path I'll take.
I rock the meteor's shit in a single turn, which makes the Alex comic throw a fit. These characters are dead. Their arcs left unfinished, with no resolution. Essentia jumps in to save Alex, and... Sure, why not? Not quite the Full House set anymore.
Fucked up, man. You fucked up. Everyone died.
With nothing else to do, Alex surrenders himself to the soul space. But not before, I shit you not, a 4-minute long monologue over black screen. Well, that's just character progress right there. At the beginning, he could only go for a minute. Is this the power of the mind dungeon? Is the content fresh? Oh no, it's just more self-flagellation. You'd think with nothing to do, Alex could work on his routine, but he's got no new material.
You're now face to face with God. You can ask him any question, and all you can ask is, what's for dinner? Maybe acknowledging your mistakes makes you not a little shit!
My mistake was thinking that video games are art.
Huh. We then find ourselves floating out in space. Panda fucks off, and I guess since it's the year 2000, we can do a Castaway reference.
What the hell am I gonna do out here all alone?
Alex, how am I supposed to know what to do?
I'm only a stuffed panda. Hey, don't come back! I don't care if you're a toy! I need you!
After a jank time trying to navigate the void, we come to an island of other Alexes. Hey, we don't all look alike.
Well, none of us have ever seen it through to the end before. You're the first, I believe. Usually we leave our body when she comes to get us.
These lot gave up the moment Essentia warned them of the coming destruction. So unlike us, they save their mates. Anyway, are you ready for YIIK's one punchline?
You know, I had a dream last night. In my dream, I saw my brother, but my brother was you. Cute little kid grew up to be an ugly ginger like yourself.
Well, this is awkward. Alex then witnesses a group of bad Alexes going off to wreck another reality and decides to follow. And as he does so, he starts fracturing, losing pieces of himself, and in a bid to retain his memory, he winds up in the daftest room of the game. It's a long linear corridor you need to backtrack across multiple times to progress. It's likely staggered so the big musical piece can play out in full. A musical piece that feels off.
I am awake, I am walking the scene. You say to me, I am only a messing. Blah 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 blah, blah blah blah. I shook my head, you are the best friend that I ever had. I am asleep, I am dreaming the same. I got a crow, and the crow's name is Molly.
The game has stripped us of our money and items, so we need to grab cash, head back for keys, then trek to the next chest. And Alex gets to see his friends taken from him once again. The game does forget to take your equipment, so if you sell it, you can just get out of here. I want to talk about reception to Alex. I think it's pretty clear by now that I don't care for the character. I think he's both undercooked and ham-fisted. When they went for annoying but likable but unlikable, they sort of buggered the balance. But that's less important than this. If you're writing a story with the pretense of having a message or a moral lesson, which I'm going to assume is what's happening because the story has felt like a fucking sales seminar so far, then likable or unlikable is less important than communicating a thought or opening a dialogue, which Alex fails to do, and I doubt it's for lack of trying. But in this chapter lies the big misunderstanding with Alex that I want to tackle, and yes, I'm going to bat for YIIK for a moment. The early game has characters yelling at Alex that he isn't the most important person in the universe. Well, lo and behold, he sort of is. I've seen this treated like a mistake in the writing, or that this is the story trying to justify his behaviour, since him being important absolves his wrongdoing. I don't agree with that. More so, I'd say it's a juvenile way to look at it, and it's definitely not what YIIK is going for. YIIK is a postmodern title, and I think it approaches that moniker in some non-hacky ways. It's not just wearing it as a lazy excuse to do whatever the hell it wants, it would do that anyway. In a traditional story, the power of friendship triumphs. In this, Alex's resolve led everyone to what we learn was a totally avoidable oblivion. In a traditional romance, two characters' flaws will cause them to clash, but they'll ultimately become better people for one another. In this, Alex is a possibly pan-dimensional playboy who has led multiple women to spiritual suicide. His two-timing, destructive nature is represented by how he lusts after Sammy, but can still try and pursue Vela, Rory, and Essentia, and we indirectly kill all three. In a traditional story, the implicit importance of the protagonist is an often unstated fact of the world, and if they are destined for heroism, they'll come to prove themselves worthy of it. YIIK has made Alex important and acknowledged this, but it never acts like this absolves him of wrongdoing. As a matter of fact, this ending is rubbing his own lack of responsibility in his face. His importance is presented as a negative, a cruel cosmic joke that a person so dense actually has a gravitational pull but no gravitas. Importance has not translated to correctness or automatic moral high ground. It's just that Alex is the cunt of the cosmos. Sorry, everyone. Just because we hear Alex's inner thoughts doesn't mean we're meant to agree with them. When I was playing through it, and by the way, the playthrough is on commentary.com so you can see me in the moment, I hated Alex and this framing so much that I spitefully rejected everything presented to me. I angled plot beats to see them in the worst possible light, which leads to treating YIIK as though it sees Alex as being in the right, which is unfair because up until maybe the last few seconds, if that, it really doesn't. Does this mean I'm saying that YIIK is in the end clever and this was all worthwhile? Absolutely not. It's still an overlong, tedious mess, which sometimes lines up if you forgive tiny lines of dialogue spoken several hours apart, hidden within brambles of bollocks. YIIK is rarely complex, but always complicated. It's beating you over the head with its messages by way of a donkey punch. Alex is cardboard, and the fact that within 25 hours he's managed to bumble into being slightly interesting in 3 ways does not make for a good use of time. After reliving the deaths of his former enablers, Alex comes face to face with a planet as yet untouched, and decides to do what no other Alex, not even you or I, has ever done before.
An idea is forming. A completely human genius and kind-intentioned idea. Something that no other version of me would do.
Before you answer, I want to thank you for listening to my long story. I'm afraid that this reality will soon end.
He breaks the 4th wall, asking us, our universe's Alex, to gather our universe's party and join him to put a stop to this destruction. While he's going on, I want to briefly touch on this blog post on postmodernism, where Andrew links to a list of postmodern characteristics. I think he messed up and mistook this for a checklist and not a guideline. Irony? Check. Pastiche? Well, I think you more just wrote a bad novel while a worse game was happening, but sure, check. Intertextuality? Is it that, or is it legally distinct plagiarism? Ah, sod it. Check. I also got to survive on fair use. Metafiction and temporal distortion. Well, it's certainly an opening to write an inconsistent narrative. Check. Historiographic metafiction and faction? Well, I'm sure Elisa Lam appreciates it. Check. Plus it let you do nothing with Y2K in a game called Y2K. Oh wait, look, Millennium Bugs. Well, give yourselves another pat on the back. Paranoia? I certainly don't trust YIIK. Check. Maximalism. Well, you said you wanted to be concise, but you've said a lot of things. Check. Magical realism. You tried. We can cut realism. But I don't want to say YIIK is magical, time wizard or not. But sure, check. And now finally, participation. This is what YIIK thinks of you and your mates. I'm not gonna lie, we don't really contribute anything, you know, with LP Toss and all. We just get to watch Alex kill some of his worst aspects. Which does a decent job concealing that female Alex doesn't have a unique voice. Yeah, that's what I'm calling her. Female Alex. Or Phalix. Which, you know, that works. I think it's pretty lazy to represent personal growth by having us kill our personal demons, but we're what, 5 minutes from endgame? The group sets off, and Alex runs into the spectre of Sammy. This moment where she apologizes is awful. It is a moment of actually demonstrated personal growth for Alex. He simply hugs her and lets her head home, forgiving her part in his manipulation, no words spoken. He just keeps going. And I'm sorry if this isn't a very analytical way to put it, but it's shit, and I'll trust you to fill in the gaps as to why. We finally come face to face with Proto-Alex and Essentia 995, and they give us the 411.
I'm really surprised to see you here. I'm glad you made it this far.
Oh, man, you poor guy.
It turns out Essentia 2000, on behalf of 995, was lying through her teeth in a weird, overly elaborate scheme to get an Alex to come here. Proto-Alex, Alex, and Essentia are all the same soul. Alex is the strong part, and Essentia needs us to break the connection so she can take over. So this makes about 20 different bloody ways Alex is talking to himself. You sure there's no room for Panda in here? That said, I actually like this twist now I'm sitting and listening to it. Most twists have made me go, oh. But this one has made me go, ooh. Since it did actually just pay off a bunch of bullshit with Alex talking to himself, It didn't excuse the length, and I think this line here...
The division of our soul isn't exactly natural.
I'm pretty confident that line just exists to excuse Essentia being in the same universe as Alex. I mean, it's either that, or it was never true, and the game just spent text box after text box drilling in bullshit, and I can't even discount that. It's done it. The Essentia dungeon was the game lying to us for nearly 3 consecutive hours. The plot has had to bend its own rules to get us here, which does speak to the shoddy, balled-up construction of YIIK's fiction, but you've at least paid it off, I think? It's a character study of a manipulative idiot who only listens to himself, I guess? Even to aspects of himself he's unaware of, I suppose. That perhaps led to a spiral of manipulating his own idiot self and his friends, leading them all to oblivion in an unwitting quest to destroy himself so he can conceivably take over himself. Oh, hey, Dad. It could also mean it was Alex, as in Essentia, using Sammy, as many already perchance had, against Alex, which possibly gives the whole story a beautiful, cruel irony in how Sammy was used and tossed aside. In our reality, this story played out again, but with a tragic spin. It all might have come together. Rest in peace, Elisa Lam.
This division, end this strife. Without him, there will be no outcome.
So let's follow up with a boss fight that's genius in how awful it is. You can't win. We got pulled into this reality for nothing. You're meant to take out the 2 glass pillars within a couple of turns and then get insta-killed. But LP Toss breaks the fight, making the boss forget their instant kill move and instead just do basic attacks. So now I have to wait to be whittled down. YIIK is just so genius, it got me comfortable with the LP Toss, and then it just turned it against me. Now, YIIK was never going to have a final test of skill or game knowledge, but of patience? I can think of no finale more fitting.
You have died. Do you feel it? Do you feel that tingling?
After losing, we're sent to a colourful dimension and come face to face with Roy, the hero of 2 brothers. He gives Alex a pep talk that's utterly pathetic on a meta level, saying he knows what it is to disappoint friends, family, and fans, before saying others worked hard to stop him from finishing his quest, but Alex will succeed where he failed, before sending Alex back to fight once again, and will keep losing, over and over again. There's simply no winning here. We have to take control from Alex and go throw the now open switches. And you know what? You gotta love it. In this ending that has been building towards Alex taking responsibility for himself, in the end, he can't even do it. It's handed off to you, and he takes responsibility for fucking nothing.
If you think this is the right thing to do, I'll follow your lead. On 3? That's the only thing keeping this division permanent!
Do not unplug us. We will be whole again. Don't do it. Don't unplug.
When this is done, it will merge all realities, killing all but one Alex. And hey, when you do it, you're not dead. Bored maybe, but alive. So that's actually kind of funny. In the end, the game was all leading up to one final plot line, and congratulations, it's us! The true Alex! YIIK hasn't just broken the 4th wall, it reached through it and branded us as its property. Participation? Check and mate. YIIK's ending, it's the rest of our lives. Typically for playing, I don't actually do a great deal of research. Perhaps it's laziness, but I tend to prefer keeping things to what the game itself can tell me. The end product is what matters most, it's what most people will experience, not the interview a few days later where you bitch and moan and explain your reasoning for why things were the way they were. It's not to say research isn't valuable, it absolutely is, but I prefer taking a title purely on what it can communicate. But this ending is awful. I had to go digging. I had to find out what the story was really trying to get across. And putting it together slowly, there's just a lot of puzzle pieces that don't neatly go together. YIIK has managed to cock things up in such a fascinating way. It has crafted a narrative where its own depth is unfalsifiable. Is it there? Fucking possibly? The barrels are empty and the bloke is stepping away from the oki. The board's on the floor and Eric Bristow's dead. YIIK had not only beaten me, I walked back into the ring. And now you're here with me in this mixed metaphor worthy of the game. It's nice to meet you, fellow Alex. Before I move on to the other endings, I'm going to revisit YIIK with 2 readings I've come to. We'll start with the crazier one. Everyone I've explained this to said I sound mental, which, wasn't great, especially because the video used to open with this idea. Spicy said I came off way too strong, and I'm glad he did. Trying to start from here had me trapped for months, and, well, after all these words, all this thought where I was making myself tackle YIIK from a calmer angle, and yes, I at times sounded heated, but that was the calmer angle. I think I've worked through most of my aggression. I'm a lot less inclined towards this read now, it's just too petty. But I'm going to present it, because I think it still has merit, if at the least because YIIK made me feel this way for a long time. The Windtown section was in service of this interpretation that I no longer hold to, and right up until now, I just felt so much stronger about getting here. But now I just don't have this bitterness in me. Anyhow, to talk about this first reading, I have to start with the muddiest misunderstanding levied at YIIK. People think that Alex is an author insert, a stand-in for Andrew Allinson, and I've brought up Andrew time and again in this video since if there's a story more contradictory than YIIK's, it's YIIK's development. It's clear there is a lot of author in the lead. But Alex is not an author avatar, not intentionally anyway. Alex is actually a player surrogate. Not just at the end, Alex is you from moment 1. I still stand by the player surrogate part of this, that's not even subtext by the end. With that in mind, YIIK does have a message. And the message is fuck you. YIIK is a game that hates you, and it wants that feeling to be mutual. But let me ask myself some questions so I can frame this argument. So you're saying that YIIK achieved what it set out to do? Barely. If a soldier in the trenches shot themselves in the foot, they want to be sent home, not praised for accuracy. Its player antagonism didn't have anywhere near the desired effect, owing to its dire presentation not getting people onto its wavelength. Through Alex, YIIK wanted people to see something of themselves in him and go into a feedback loop of self-loathing brought on by it. This would take a good deal of empathy on the part of the writing to achieve. The issue came from YIIK being too unlikable and Alex too defined a character for others to want to tie themselves to. If it did make that link, I doubt it would last regardless. This is because YIIK's loathing doesn't come from a constructive place. YIIK isn't showing tough love through Alex's flaws, it's instead a 25-hour-long, directionless, crazed rant. But there is method to this madness. If you're meant to hate YIIK, why did Andrew Allinson get mad about its reception on the Dick Show? I don't feel it contradicts me. YIIK is a game built on barely disguised spite. I've got to assume the man didn't like the fire he started. Even good artists who understand how people respond to things can be annoyed when people take the wrong message away. It's not inhuman to dislike being misunderstood, let alone feeling like people hate you by proxy of a character they think is a self-insert. The guy was clearly mad at the time, and despite all of this, YIIK is still clearly a very personal project for the Allinson siblings. Are you suggesting YIIK is deeper than it was given credit for? I'm actually suggesting the opposite, that it's shallow by design. Now there is a bit more than just fuck you in there, but pretensions of depth are just that. Pretensions. There to trip you up if you start trying to think too hard about it. In this case, YIIK's time-wasting, which I explored in Windtown, takes on a much more sinister meaning, and YIIK's overall shoddy construction starts showing a callous consistency. YIIK has 2 writing tricks. One is to make everything take too long, 2 is to make sure nothing goes anywhere, reaches a meaningful answer, or if it does, contradict it elsewhere. It draws the player down dead ends, never giving you anything satisfying intellectually or emotionally. The reason these tricks hide under the surface is down to the fact it never stops employing them. Ever. I'm not even talking about back-to-back. Examples of this are overlapping. You get jerked around as you get jerked around.
Do you really think Y2K could have something to do with Sammy's disappearance?
No. The other reason these tricks stay hidden is because YIIK hides them in plain sight. You see the more surface level examples of it, while it's pulling the same trick under the hood. The player looks at the world through Alex's eyes but can see what he can't. The answers that would save you both hours of time. And this is done with just enough plausible deniability. YIIK can deny it's wasting your time. After all, it's in Alex's character. And we're Alex. And Alex is us. And we cannot do different. In Essentia's dungeon, the game more or less spells out Alex's feelings of guilt for the actions of other Alexes. And hey, we are Alex, beings of destruction. This guilt is implied to be ours as well, since without fail, each and every Alex is on some level bad. YIIK comes off as absurdly disingenuous in near enough everything it claims to be inspired by or is ostensibly about. Nostalgia, the 90s, the millennium bug, hipsters, music, the occult, self-improvement, the afterlife. most disgustingly Elisa Lam. It uses imagery and hollow references with nothing to ever say about the nature of any of these things. It's there to appeal to the shallow Alex that YIIK takes you for. We fight the worst aspects of ourselves, our sleaze, our laziness, our pretension, our perversion, and right at the climax, we meet Roy, protagonist of Two Brothers, a game which Act shows an uncomfortable amount of reverence for. Two Brothers failed for very public reasons. Well, they would be public if anyone knew about it. The game is a glitchy mess. Few who bought it could clear it, and now no one can buy it. The people who stopped Roy from finishing his journey were not the people bashing the game, but Roy's own authors. They stole music, then took the game down to remake it in Unity. It's in talking to him that YIIK reveals the source of its spite, a failure most of the audience wouldn't even recognize. Then, emboldened by words that deny reality, you have to submit to failure anyway. The only way to hit end credits is to attempt a roundabout form of metaphysical suicide that by YIIK's own writing, irreparably ties Alex to you. The game may as well end with a pop-up saying, "Do you agree Alex is you? Yes, no," with no just keeping you in place. That's an incentive to try the boss fight as much as possible, right? You spend an entire game in the grips of a manipulative idiot who drags others along on dangerous wastes of time, who forces others to indulge in his self-serving guilt, and ultimately marches a bunch of people YIIK asks you to invest in to their deaths. Then, at the very end, it will only let you leave with an admission of guilt. So yeah, a bit heavy. As I said way at the beginning, my thoughts were ever shifting. Perhaps I'm making this video not just because I promised I would, but to finally get these brainworms and spite out of me. My journey in understanding YIIK has been more interesting and perilous than the game itself. Which is arrogant to say, but fuck it. Let's talk about Two Brothers for a moment. Owing to the magic of key sites, I managed to snag a copy. And you know what? It's not good. But in some regards, it's better than YIIK. I didn't finish it because it's glitchy and boring, but there are some interesting parallels between the two titles. First up, here's what I like. The game is presented in monochrome reminiscent of a Game Boy screen. Unlike YIIK, there is purpose to the presentation. It opens with that Roy bloke out on an expedition with his wife. Well, that's only half the truth. Really, it opened with it not loading the foreground. The two of them are killed by a fish monster, and Roy finds himself in a dimension filled with colour. He's blown away by it, but at the same time he's terrified and trying to find his wife. When he runs into a cosmic guide, he doesn't have any of his questions answered and is returned to life. It's at this point I joked to myself that we're going to cut back to him trying to find these colours, not giving a shit about his dead wife. And that's exactly what happened. But the joke was on me, because Two Brothers was going somewhere with it. As Roy meets other characters and starts his journey, it becomes clear that the man is in denial, and has thrown himself into his work in an effort to ignore his own grief. It's hardly original, but it's something. The dialogue isn't great. The emphasis on the scientific community and science is beyond stilted, and it's still a little verbose. This line here was so hilariously clunky, I had to stop and just appreciate it for a while. So unlike YIIK, when this game attempts drama and flops, it's at the least amusing. You know how Five Nights at Freddy's came about because people said Scott Cawthon's models looked really weird and he embraced their artificiality? I think Andrew attempted the same thing with his dialogue by making all of his characters fake as fuck, but to far less success. Regardless of that, these dialogues are a lot snappier, and I did get the feeling that there were things being left unsaid for me to pick up on about the characters, motivations, and their history. It gives you details, but is confident enough to let them sit from time to time, or otherwise just say what it needs to and move on. And move on. Like Alex, Roy is also unlikable. He's got little regard for his own life, is putting himself and his brother in mortal peril, and comes off a little unhinged and selfish. Here's how he's unlike Alex. He's at least a little compelling, he's a little sympathetic, his motives can be clearly gathered without being outright stated. He's got, as Alex would say the French would say, a raison d'etre. Both games explore existential ideas and deal with the topic of loss, but in the 2 hours of Two Brothers I played, Roy had presented a more nuanced, believable, if stock take on grief than any character in YIIK had done in its 20-hour plus runtime. If nothing else, this is proof that Andrew can write a character and stop himself from indulging his every thought. I mean, maybe he fucks it up as he goes along, I don't know. The restrained, minimalist presentation gave less words for him to make a mess with. Unlike YIIK, which uses sprite-like animations to jarring effect, the playfulness of bringing colour to a monochromatic world actually benefits what Two Brothers is going for. And while very on the nose, it complements the theme of grief over losing a loved one. The downsides are far more numerous, but I'll keep them relevant to what we see in YIIK. Moments after the death of Roy's wife and a heartfelt dialogue with an innkeeper who knows about the danger Roy is walking into, we meet a character who makes a fourth wall breaking joke about colours making a game kiddie. And that's the tip of the iceberg. The NPC jokes are still numerous and are far more grating than in YIIK. YIIK's irreverent world is admittedly annoying, but it's far more clear from the off. Alex's goal is a purely self-motivated one. The issues of everybody else have no bearing on our journey. In Two Brothers, the world is presented as mystical, dangerous, and sort of downbeat. Our goal is to bring colour to it. I don't want these bastards having colour. Most everyone we run into outside of the first room is needlessly awful, or exists just to make really strange gags. Like the Mind Dungeon put a gameplay spin on leveling, Two Brothers has us jump into and navigate our backpack in place of a menu, which only makes a basic function take longer and feel far less involved. Once again, it's putting a spin on a menu without realizing why menus tend to be the go-to. The gameplay is slow, it often fails to communicate objectives and the tools we need to use to overcome them. This is especially bad where puzzles are concerned. The brothers, as gameplay and level designers, repeatedly struggle with conveying information. With both games, I start getting an idea of where the interests of the developers lie through their shared elements. Irreverent, if ill-fitting RPG humour, ruminations on the afterlife, spins on gameplay and menu usage which feel more like attempts to be different than a product of good sense, and gameplay intertextuality. Why then does YIIK have such a love for this first release? With only 2 games under its belt, they're already going for a mythology to form around their characters, which is utterly perplexing, especially seeing as A, few people know about Two Brothers, B, few people are going to learn about Two Brothers, and C, the few who do not like Two Brothers. Now, YIIK as an idea predates Twin Bros. During YIIK's development, stolen music was discovered in a couple of siblings. Perhaps it's the bugginess, perhaps it's the negative reception, perhaps it's the presence of stolen music. Whatever it was, it led to them taking down Couple Kyodai and announcing they'll be remaking it in Unity as Chromophore, slated for release in 2016. I think that's around the same time YIIK's first ending was rewritten, and we'll talk about the original ending shortly. As of this writing, Chromophore is still not out. Still, I think the failure of Two Brothers hasn't been denied, just willfully misinterpreted by its own creators, and a lot of bitterness runs through YIIK. But I'd like to talk about my second, more charitable interpretation of YIIK, built on the first. It posits that YIIK probably doesn't hate you, but it definitely doesn't respect you. YIIK wants to explore the relationship between an audience and a text, a relationship on which it takes a dim view, seeing it as shallow, selfish, and transient. Alex, once again acting as a player surrogate, is unsympathetic and manipulative. He treats those around him as though they exist purely for his own whims, with anything that gets in the way of his desires treated with disinterest or scorn. The few instances of sympathy from Alex, such as with Claudio and Chandra's missing brother, are at best empty gestures. Alex acts shocked to indulge in that catharsis before instantly pivoting back to what he wants, dragging those two along with him. Alex doesn't really care, and YIIK posits that, well, neither do you. Their problems exist for you to feel bad at. Just, don't interrupt me. And of course they won't get in the way, because after this, their agency is stripped from them and they exist purely for you. They're coming on the player's wild ride. We learn of Alexes in other realities who selfishly do what they want, then through willful force or inaction send that universe to destruction. These are the movies, books, and games the player has already consumed, sucking what they want from them before putting them away, an analogy for ending that reality. There's never a real reason given for Alex's destruction, he just does it for kicks before moving on. This is why I find Alex attempting to kiss everyone but leading Rory to suicide to be the most thematically appropriate telling of YIIK, even outside of this interpretation. It reflects that self-centeredness right back at the player. In this light, Alex's griping but lack of actual personal growth is bemoaning the player for even being here. This isn't progress. This is dangerous, pointless catharsis. Just as Alex is chasing a girl who he doesn't actually know and doesn't really exist in our reality, the player is doing the same but by proxy. With the reveal at the end that this was all orchestrated by Essentia and that she's another aspect of Alex, it frames the entire conflict around the player. This was never about Sammy, this was never about the party or about saving the world. This was always about us. Sammy may apologize before the ending, and that's the payoff YIIK assumes we want, but then the next room reveals how naive her apology was. Essentia wasn't just lying to us, she was saying what she thought we wanted to hear to get us where she, who is also us, wanted. Which is, well, pretty funny actually, considering how boring it was. Yeah, I want 4 straight minutes of tedious exposition before I can enter the info dump dungeon. That keeps me going.
There is a universe where you got your dick wet.
Tell me what to do. The point is, it's all about being tricked. It's false motivation that YIIK argues we give to ourselves. We would never really act selflessly. Roy's message to the player promises of a victory waiting below, but there isn't one. It's just another game that has to end.
You interface with the soul space via a gaming device.
I have many things to tell you, and very little time. My name is Kale. I come from a universe parallel to yours. My world needs your help. You're the only one who can save us. I succeeded in opening a breach between my world and yours. Through your computer, you can enter our world and help us.
The game hasn't brought you any closer to a colourful nirvana, just another hollow finale, something else to check off the list. And as the credits roll, all that's left is you. Gotta say it again, you're Alex, the most important being in the universe, and ultimately its downfall. YIIK posits that the audience is selfish by default, their empathy inauthentic, treating worlds and characters as only existing for them, even when they may tell themselves otherwise. It says we can never actually hold a dialogue with fiction, we can only ever monologue. The shoddy construction of the world, the unfinished character arcs, the metaphysics which lead off into nowhere, the contradictions, these might not be intentional, but they aid this understanding of YIIK. After all, a player will just take away whatever the hell they want from it. Why should it need to add up? As I'm writing this, I'm just now hit by the strange joke I've played on myself. My frustration at having no clear takeaway on the game has led to me making one where the only takeaway is that we never really take away anything. Regardless, from this perspective, this is the only way YIIK could end. Is what I'd say if there weren't 3 more endings.
Do you feel it?
YIIK's secret ending is a strange beast, existing to preemptively belittle those who won't like how the game pivots away from onism, Alex finding Sammy, and him getting a job. It gives you a happy ending, but it does it with disdain. Just before the party leaves for New York, you can check onism and find a post from BPA, or Brian Allenson, suggesting that Sammy is still out there somewhere. Lo and behold, you find her behind the tree out front. She finds it funny how much time Alex has wasted when she's been right here. And by the way, she loves us. This makes Alex so angry he steals Claudio's car and books it for KNN, the place where Sammy worked. At this point, the game starts calling Alex by your name. It's speaking directly to you. And by the way, you're now an intern at this news office. You perform a series of poorly coded and awkwardly explained fetch quests for the boss. Supposing he died, you find Rory's ghost in a dead people closet, and he says his death wasn't your fault. After a bunch of running back and forth, your boss is fired, you disintegrate a secretary, and now you can head further upstairs. You're forced to speak with a bunch of cut content before returning to where you first found Sammy. She confirms that Essentia is a fake. This leads you back to the elevator, where Sammy says that if you leave, reality won't end somehow. Everyone will live, but you'll never be able to return. If you enter the lift, the game refers to Alex entering the lift. And then, you're there. Fuck it. And it ends with him and Sammy embracing. This ending is wrong to me. There's daggers in smiles here. It plays itself cheery, but I know a psycho when I see one. Every aspect of it is condescending towards the player, sneering at them. They wouldn't let me make a happy ending is a common motif throughout, which is a strange comment to make for a studio that has no expectations on it, just like the two brothers pandering. It assumes an image and identity and gets prickly when it's challenged. The boring, half-broken fetch quests that spin you in circles devoid of meaning, Rory saying his death isn't your fault, yeah, you, not Alex, even though both narratively and mechanically, it has to be. Plus, Sammy being alive and telling you the universe doesn't end if you leave with her defies the story's own rules so explicitly that taking the happy ending is taking a poisoned chalice. This ending is a sly, underhanded insult to those who think YIIK could end in any way but the other one. The third ending to talk about is the original cut ending, but some context is necessary for its removal, and hopefully this should explain some other aspects of this whole story. The development of YIIK was not easy. It was long and arduous. The development posts I've been referring to, they're from late 2014 into early 2015. YIIK came out 4 years after these. Just after YIIK received the money that ensured it would go ahead, the Allensons' mother was diagnosed with cancer. The brothers found a studio within a short drive from home so they could be at her side at a moment's notice. But as her condition worsened, production moved into their living room. They worked day in, day out with her there. And no matter what YIIK became or what it stands to be, it's a game that represents their final times with her. I will admit to feeling cruel whenever I think about this in regards to writing this video. I have my misgivings about Andrew. I definitely don't like his game, but that's besides the point. Losing family, friends, and loved ones is a horrible experience, and I'm shitting on something that would have to be extremely meaningful to all involved, that holds such connection and significance. It's why I do feel sort of wrong in using his appearance on The Dick Show at points. Yeah, I've taken the piss out of him, but yeah, no shit the guy is angry. People are stirring up controversies over things that weren't meant. A bunch of people not only hate your main character, they think he's based on you. And this game is tied to the last few months you spent with your mother. I'd be a hell of a lot madder than him, all considered. While they were away in Seattle demoing the game, she took a fall that she ultimately did not recover from. And following her passing, the game sat for a few months while they recovered. When the brothers returned to YIIK, they found it no longer represented them, so they rewrote roughly a quarter of it, including a total rewrite of the ending, with the intent to sand off its edges, make it less cynical and more humanistic. But we're still not ready to talk about the cut ending, because we have to talk about a cut opening first, where we played as Essentia. The game used to open on a tutorial as her, which got the axe for dragging the pace down, and yes, something got cut from YIIK for that. Opening on Essentia shouldn't have been cut. A tutorial as her maybe, but opening on her doing anything would have made the second act shift in focus from Sammy to her feel more deliberate. Her being playable would have made a more lasting impression than some odd cutscenes that pop up apropos of nothing, along with raising the question of how is she doing what she's doing. The reveal that Essentia had been gaslighting Alex all along would hit harder if we were made an unwitting accomplice in our own manipulation. It would help the big reveal that her and Alex are the same person feel less like a last-second addition to throw in a big twist. The idea was clearly planned ahead, but in the moment, experiencing the story for the first time, it doesn't land, it rings hollow. And while we're on a playable Essentia, I'm going to make a bit of a leap. Do you remember this room and its song?
I am asleep, I am dreaming the sea. I got a crow, and the crow's name is Molly. She has no wings, she was never a flybird. She is the worst red that I ever had.
I think this track was meant for a segment with Essentia. It's her theme. It speaks at length about a machine being loved in dreams, and Marlene, who Essentia is using as her Dali in that cut tutorial. What's more important is that this song should be very familiar, if we just listen to Alex's theme. This says they're the same but different so much better. Alex's uses acoustic instruments, whistling, and mocking chanting, showing him as an aimless human. Essentia's is more synthetic, it has lyrics telling a story, portraying her as more cold and focused. She was always the one who knew what was going on. While I'm here, you ever think about how their attack minigames are basically the same thing? That's a neat detail. Sorry, I'm talking about a cut opening. Let's fast forward 20 hours. I think the divergence point happens sometime after Planet Alex, or at least that's an aspect that remained in both writings. In this ending, Alex has come to learn that Essentia was trying to fight the source of destruction, Proto-Alex. She has duped many versions of him into following her to their deaths, and he was nearly brought here, to his execution. Imagery for this ending still exists in the game, in Essentia's dungeon no less. It still makes some sense with what we got, but it's a lot weaker. But Alex realizes what Essentia is fighting, sees her desperation, and decides to go and help of his own free will, fully aware of the danger and deception. This is already more meaningful. Alex is showing a genuine capacity for forgiveness that is just tossed into the other ending with a far less meaningful character. It felt vaguely sickening to put it that way, but there we go. Essentia gets a more sympathetic showing here as well. She doesn't really want to harm Alex, but figures he's the only one who can stop himself. So time and again, she drags him to his death in the hopes of averting disaster and sparing what remains. But this Alex doesn't care. He's brought you along and is committed to ending this cycle.
Okay, enough of the talking. Let's get down to kicking this thing's ass!
Enough of the talking, says Alex. That just cements this as the better ending. That line alone. And kick its ass they do. They win in this one. Essentia, dumbstruck by their victory, tries to explain herself, how she hurt Alex and those he cared about. But Alex actually says not to think about that right now. He turns down needless words and endeavors to head to a new reality, one without a parallel version of him, become a better person, find his friends again, and help people.
Only, maybe with a little more caution.
The game ends with him thanking the player, not just for helping him, but for doing it without being asked. So I'm going to say, and yes, I feel like a bastard for doing this, but what cynicism here needed to be sanded off? An ending where Alex repeatedly demonstrates growth, acting not just of his own initiative, but truly selflessly, where he comes to understand the pain of the one who hurt him and work to help them, and not just them, but to stop this pain from reaching people he'll never even know. And in the end, learn not to beg and plead for explanations, but to just maturely accept what is. I mean, Sammy is still dead, as are Alex's friends, and there is a sort of naive disregard for all of that. There's also an argument to be made that maybe this guy just really isn't worthy of redemption, or that this is just not enough for all the shit that came to pass. It definitely aggrandizes this arsehole a bit much, with Essentia genuinely caring for him, rather than Alex being an unwitting lab rat all along. But this is still leagues more pleasant than what replaced it. The change feels more like a product of retreating into grief than anything else. So, who was it stopping you from writing a happy ending exactly? There used to be one here, and not just happier, but more meaningful. I have to back off a little here. I've experienced loss, and not just that funny webcomic by that crazy guy. Just coming at this change with that in mind, it feels odd to even explain the changes as an addition of humanity when it's so much bleaker than an ending filled with compassion, forgiveness, and moving on with lessons learned. The fourth and final ending present is another secret one that was hyped as being unfindable by data mining. And indeed, data miners can't find it, because it's not in the game. Oh, the puzzle elements that would supposedly let you access the ending are there, but they have zero functionality. They just claim to be operable. Plus, the entire ending is made up of areas and assets that don't exist in the game's files. If you've watched YIIK's trailers, however, you've seen some of them. So where is this ending? Well, it's on YouTube, on a barely disguised developer account. So in this ending, Alex once again takes the car, but this time drives the party to a lighthouse. This is visible on the map, but inaccessible in standard play. In there you find Essentia's tutorial, and it is kinda boring. But he fights through it and arrives in another reality's Frankton. It's in this Frankton he finds Essentia and Wilfred. Some cryptic bullshit is exchanged, and Alex ultimately follows the two out of time and reality. This is where it gets very strange. Alex has clearly been through the events of YIIK right up until the end, more than once. Alex has travelled through time and multiple realities pursuing another path. The boss fight has Alex and the still living original party. As Timrod puts it, you can tell a developer's playing this because they know not to use LP toss and just end the fight instantly. With Essentia and Wilfred defeated, Alex is blown away that he managed to beat them this time, but the party is confused by what just happened. Alex admits he's not sure what's going on, but decides to instead say he's been an idiot. Being in a room that exists outside of space and time, the party decides to depart, heading back to before the events of YIIK began to prevent any of this from coming to pass. And I will say, in all of the accusations of plagiarism, I never expected that YIIK would steal the ending of Sonic 06, but, well, here we are. Alex got the fucking groceries? Alright, so what's going on here? Well, frankly, I think it's another insult to the player. One of a different stripe from the other secret ending, and it comes from this small exchange. Chandra asks what would happen if they went to New York, and Alex says it's too horrible to say. He's experienced that ending, and wouldn't dare burden the party with knowing what happened. This is the Alex you'll never be. This is the one who made the right choice, saved his friends, and got everyone their happy ending. This ending not existing in the game is key, because it says you can never do this. You will always be the Alex who went to New York, who had to compromise. This Alex is not you, never really met you, and doesn't need you. And on the whole, this ending is incredibly haphazard, intentionally vague, throws up questions only to swat them away. The first secret ending treats the idea of happiness as a joke. This one just doesn't care either way. Sure, be happy, whatever, you didn't really listen to a word I said, did you? As it ends, Alex thanks you. You being Link, a developer of YIIK, the one who uploaded an ending that's out of reach. This closure is denied. This YIIK doesn't end severing the link. Fuck, I didn't mean that. A lot of things in YIIK are revealed to be wastes of time. Rory, the job hunt, the record hunt, Essentia, these are the standout examples, but it culminates in a month grinding for a boss fight that is unwinnable. And this ending adds so much insult to injury. Without this ending, that month grinding is a valiant effort. They failed, but they tried. This ending takes that silver lining away. It was not only pointless, it was wasteful. Because there was a solution that the player never saw, which is because it isn't there, but the insult stands. Now, to go into full bore insanity, we have to talk about music one last time. The track is called Puzzle Pieces. You've heard some of it already, and you probably don't want to hear more, but here are some choice lyrics.
Give your final words to me. I'll take a leave of absence from walking by the sea. There's a path I'll take with so much at stake. Just try to understand this is not a mistake. Where's the piece of this puzzle? I'm begging, please. Where's the answer? The world needs the void.
It seems innocent, but I just can't shake the feeling that this track is mocking the player, taunting them for already having gone down the wrong path and leaning on their inability to do right. And, well, what's that chanting as we enter the lighthouse? It's fucking puzzle pieces. It's fucking puzzle pieces. This ending does aid my second reading, however, seeing as unlike in the game proper where you have to take Alex away with you since you played as him, this unplayable ending keeps the player and Alex separate. You didn't truly experience this ending. It's vicarious, and it's not for you, and you don't take Alex with you. It keeps you separate because you're not truly the audience. We're not this Alex. We can't be this Alex. We're the ones who are meant to switch the game off. Wow, it's fucking over. It's done. I've finished talking about the bloody thing. Every ending. I think it's fair to say I don't much like YIIK, but in spite of its tedium, it might be one of the most fascinating and genuinely absurd games I've ever played. It's clearly an auteur work. What's unclear is how many of its flaws come from antipathy, misguided choices, or ambition that gets in the way of a clear head. It's a game that's obviously beating you over the head with its themes, but it's also damn near unreadable, and it's unclear to the point that it's unclear if that's by design or by fumbled writing. It feels like a game that puts being unique and postmodern above being insightful and engaging, while treating the school of thought not as the result of a story told and methods employed, but as a checklist that has to be worked towards. Alex is a character that is at once endlessly discussable owing to just how much he's meant to get across and how much he bloody well spouts, but is also interminably boring, shallow, and detestable. Yet, these are all part and parcel aspects of his character. YIIK is so knotted up, so poorly told, so confusing, that when I think I see something clever or thoughtful, I'm not inclined to be happy that the story is doing something. I panic. Because if I go to bat for it, I always feel like there has to be something elsewhere in the story that will inevitably tear it away. If YIIK is genuinely clever at points, it's so untrustworthy I could never be sure. It's so unlikable I don't want to trust it, and has so much bile that I don't want to like it. I have to fight my instincts to give it props when I see something good, and I'm aware of how unfair that is. If YIIK is a title that's acting in earnest, that has a story, a theme, a message to convey, and wants people to enjoy its systems and gameplay, or just give people a good time at the end of the day, it's a failure. It gets so excited about just how much it thinks it has to talk about that it never winds up saying anything. It speeds through its ideas and dashes all of them against the rocks, never giving anything time to grow and develop. It sits on characters for too long, and abandons character arcs and plot beats in service of its worst quality. Alex. If YIIK is a title that's meant to be a stab at the player, antagonistic in nature, it's still a failure, and a rather pitiable one at that. One that can't even be hated right. In its antipathy, it fails to communicate anything and just looks crazed and spiteful. Viewer antagonistic works tend not to be very popular and aren't terribly common. What YIIK wants people to feel bad over is as unclear as anything else. I've been harsh on the Allenson siblings and the team, and especially Andrew, and I do think that man has a capacity for bullshit. But I also think he has the capacity to tell a good story when he's not being his own worst enemy. There are nice little details and ideas in YIIK, I think. They just never coalesce and take form, but given another shot and some refinement, I think a good game is well within Axe reach. The ambition and imagination is certainly there. They just get out of hand. So that's that. We'll have something fun next time, something where I don't drive myself to madness. Let's try and focus on cool games that want us to enjoy life for a little bit. With these RPGs, videos have been bigger but slower to come lately, so I do appreciate everybody's patience. I want to thank Noonem, Spicy, Emily, Hotcyder, Tujo, and the many other poor unfortunate souls who had to hear me ramble about YIIK and be the poor recipients of whatever my latest revelation was over the months writing this thing. Their input and questioning helped so much with me putting my thoughts into any coherent order, or at least as coherent as this is. I've got to say, you guys are the real Michaels, Vellas, Rorys, Claudia. Your aid was really Essentia. Oh. Yeah, they're gonna fucking beat the shit out of me one day. There are plenty of other great videos on YIIK out there that I'll link to in the description if you want to go further down this rabbit hole, since hey, going down rabbit holes is good. Obviously, we've got Running Shine's excellent review, Game Dog's 3-part breakdown trying to place YIIK in relation to Earthbound likes, Jack Saint's own struggle for meaning with YIIK, Uric Salad Bar's Hero You're Supposed to Hate video takes a particular interest in Alex's worst qualities, Combat Lobster compiled a video showing off YIIK's cut content, where what's left of the old ending is viewable. I want to once again shout out Timrod's screenshot LP of YIIK, which has been invaluable for this video for letting me cross-reference parts of YIIK far faster than I could have done in video form, and for writing an entertaining and incredibly insightful LP. Screenshot LPs are a dying art, and I used to love to read this stuff, so an extra thanks just for carrying the torch. If you want to support me, please spread this video around. I hope it's evident that I've put a lot of time and effort into this bugger. If you want to support me more directly, I have a Patreon, and for one-off donations, a Ko-Fi. Supporters on Patreon get access to a Patreon-only Discord. Just DM me for an invite on there. At any tier, you get access to that and join the lovely people scrolling past. At $3, you get access to my notes, scripts, and research materials. And at $5, you get access to afterthought videos where I answer viewer questions about the game I just covered and go over things that didn't make it into the video. That's it. Have a good night, everybody. I hope this video was entertaining and informative, and I'll see you next time.